The library had become my home. I find solace here, amongst the tomes and the shelves, shadows dancing in the flickering light of candles. At this time of year, Manchester lies in perpetual gloom. The sun, a memory from warmer months, now unseen beyond the ceiling of lead hanging above the dark edifices. Once famed for its wet climate, when people cared about such things, rain falls in this English city, crackling against the stained glass of my home. Evening meant what little light filtered through the clouds vanished as the earth's angular momentum spun the city away. The darkness of night arrives quickly at this time of year. I huddle in front of my fire of chopped up wood from any branches or furniture I find during my day, and candles surround me. In the flickering shadows beyond, half-read books litter the chairs and tables, stacked haphazardly, some with pages spread open. These works keep me sane in an insane world. Yet again I ask myself the question, has madness invaded my mind? Or am I the only sane one in a world of lunacy? Plenty would look upon my situation and declare me mad, living as I am amongst the dead. I rub my hands toward the fire, the top of my fingers icy cold as they emerge from the tips of my gloves. My threadbare clothing is not adequate during winter, and yet felt too warm in the summer. But each year I spend here, living in solitude, the city grows colder. The warming planet of my youth, long hot summers of forgotten paradise, teased in my fractious memory. My current existence a freezing nightmare. Could I leave the city? Would I be accepted amongst those who remain? No. They shun me, fear me. In the bathroom of the library lies a mirror. Once it had been polished and bright. Now the years of accumulated dirt and grime mean that only the middle of it displays my reflection. My hideousness makes me want to smash it to pieces, break it into 1,000 shards. I am a goblin, no better than one of the gargoyles that adorn the outside walls of the city's cathedral. My disfigurement and scarring, terrifying anyone who sees me. And yet here, in this abandoned city, I perform a service that nobody else can. This library that I call home is my sanctuary. I find moments of joy as I spend my lonely hours exploring the world of words contained within. Escaping my torment for hours each day as I read. During my time here, I'd found a home in this church of the mind, and indeed, the Gothic architecture resembled a place of worship rather than literature. I spend my days reading about the history of this old town. This is indeed my home now, my permanent home. I can never leave, so I find out as much as possible about it. I'd learned about how the Romans founded a fort at the confluence of the River Medlock and the River Irwell, adopting a Celtic settlement on the same site. The Celts have their word mam, meaning river goddess, and the Romans Latinized it to Mamicum, and then later to Mancunium. Those rivers, swollen with the rainfall, and a haven for the rats emerging from the sewer system, still flowed through the concrete channels of the city to this day. And yet, to my mind, a city with as many tales to tell as Manchester is a place of beauty. The red-bricked buildings spoke of the industrial heritage. I spend my time roaming the streets, trying to hear the centuries talking to me, as though the very bones of the hollowed-out town could tell stories. I sometimes imagine their whisperings, only to find the relentless wind whistling through their ruin. Great beauty lies within superficial ugliness. It is a concept I cling to. Being alone plays tricks with your mind. I hold conversations with Emmeline Pankhurst, standing on her chair in her wide-brimmed hat in St. Peter's Square, and with Alan Turing, sat with his apple amongst the feral pigeons of Sackville Park. Their bronze statues often reply, words from unmoving lips echoing through my being, their bronze sculpted perfection, a stark contrast to my daily communal with the dead. As I sit in the firelight, the tongues of flame make me drowsy. My face feels warm, perspiration lingering between the folds of my pitted skin. but my feet remain cold, sat within the holed soles of my boots. I should take them off and rub my sore toes through greasy socks. But sleep isn't far away, and the night in the city brings terrors to my heart that I may imagine would feel very real to a tired and befuddled mind. I have a sleeping bag, which I found hidden away, not looted, in one of the camping stores. I crawl into it. For a pillow, it is surprising how worn, leather-bound books can provide cushioning to my crooked neck. The library is full of large tomes, and I have spent many hours finding the softest ones. My favourite was an old Bible full of yellowed pages, faded over the years, gold leaf still dotting the once decorated Holy Script. I position it beneath my cheek. As I fall asleep, I listen to the crackling wood in the hearth. My dreams are golden and are always a version of memory, a fantastical fantasy of the synapses of reality. They are an escape, an antidote to the infection. On this night, my dream is especially vivid. The White Lady is dressed in lace. She looks down on me with sympathetic eyes and wipes my sweated brow with a cooling, balm-infused cloth. Her mouth speaks words of comfort to me, and yet I cannot hear her. The features in her face remain hidden behind a soft whiteness, a splash of angelic glare. But I know who she was. She was the one I left behind. That dress she wears, when she moves, the long skirt sweeps the ground as though she floats. It has a train and a simple blue bow tied around the back of her slender waist. I try to call to her as she drifts away from me, but she turns her face back, raising a finger to the blank visage. Hush. Why can I not see her face? Why is it hidden from me? Then the answer comes. She's veiled. She continues to move away from me, out of the room I am in, until she vanishes. I want to follow, to bring her back, to find my way to her once again. I seem to be on a camp bed in a bright room. The light comes through an open gap in the wall where a window once sat. Now it is open to the elements. I see ivy crawling around the concrete frame, invading the ripped wallpaper of my room. I make my way through the rooms, stumbling like a drunkard, searching every abandoned corner for her. Where is she? Why can't I find her? But then, through a broken down hole in the wall, I see a flash of pure white moving away over the field to some far off, indistinct location. I call to her, but she does not hear. Locating a concrete staircase, I descend rapidly, searching for the exit, chasing after her. The varnished wooden doors hang from their frames, held by bent hinges. I run in my bare feet outside, but I cannot see her. She has gone, left forever. On the ground, a glint catches my eye. I crouch and pick up a simple silver ring. Turning back, I look upon the building. The remains of the Victorian hospital sweep in front of my vision. Broken windows and tumbled masonry appears to make it grin back at me wickedly. I slip the silver ring on my finger. I wake to a cold dawn, huddled in my blanket. My ears are cold, with my fire dying at some point during the night. Every morning I contemplate staying here, cuddled up in my sleeping bag, remaining in this spot and never moving again. It would be so easy to just fall asleep and never wake. But then my work would never be done. I will never finish my masterpiece. As I raise myself, wearily, from my repose, I ask myself, when will I finish? When will I have completed my task? The answer does not come, but I console myself with the presumption that I will know when that will be, when it happens. My memory of what came before faded during my infirmity, lost when the virus invaded my organs and musculature. My survival a miracle, but bought at great personal cost. My damaged cerebrum teases me with the fragments while I sleep, but recollection does not return. Much of my current existence is built on supposition, and since I am compelled by my work, I can only suppose that it is the vocation of being an artist that drives me. Is that also why I chose a library to be my home during my solitude? I clear the hearth of last night's spent fuel and replace it with fresh wood, but just a little. I won't be spending long here this morning. My supplies are running low, and as I light a scrap of paper with a match and place it amongst the new wood, I grab my pan and the last egg from the box. After my breakfast, I take the ladder up to the roof of the library, flipping open the hatch as I step out into the cold city. My breath fogs, adding to the white mist surrounding all. So dense is the atmosphere, the surrounding buildings are mere ethereal shapes, shadows just out of view. Last evening's rain holds dampness in the air, but the cold freezes into icicles and frost-covered masonry. Standing behind the crenulations, my barrel captures the water from the sky. I have to crack the ice surface with my metal ladle to reach the liquid below, but drink deeply. The freezing water slips down my throat, forcing me to shiver, but as soon as I've quenched my thirst, I return inside to warm myself by the fire. Today the freezing fog surrounds me as I leave the library, seeming to penetrate the threads of my clothing, my skin, and seep into my skeleton. I feel made of ice, and yet I must continue my work. Making my way down Deansgate to the south end of the city, I shuffle past empty buildings. Empty, I say, and yet I know that they are not. I feel watched, even though no other human would dare enter the city limits now. The broken windows echo with memory, as though the structures see me and are staring down with horror. This street was once the main thoroughfare, running from the south gateway to the cathedral in the northern quarter, but now serves as my pathway to reach the moorings to my personal gamut. Complete silence. No sound permeates these streets, the roads, the alleys, or the overgrown gardens. The drips from last night's rainfall solidified into clear spikes of glass. Not even a breeze to clear the cloudy air. As I reach the Castlefield area, my feet slip on the smooth cobblestones. The high arches of the elevated train tracks loom over me, silhouettes in the white mist, and the sound of a hull rapping against its mooring reaches my ears. The sound used to fill me with dread, but no more. I've been doing this now for so long. So long. Just ahead, forming out of the indistinct shapes around me, a barge sits at the side of the canal dock. Here the two rivers feed the canal, once a highway of trade and commerce, now just a single flatbed narrowboat, 6 amongst the cracked surface ice. I see the wake caused by the boats with the broken flow trail disappearing into the haze beyond. The boat follows its own course. I do not understand the mechanical workings, but some kind of autopilot moves the boat to and from this quayside. I unload its cargo, press a button, and the chugging engine starts up. Just once, when I started my task many months or years ago, I had seen the deliverers dressed head to toe in hazmat suits. They never spoke, and I could not see their faces. From their panicked movements, I could tell they found the task, and me, terrifying. Ever since, they installed this navigation device. It is a form of wizardry in my mind, as I watch the barge rotate, and then drift off, back to its destination, driven by invisible hands. But first, I need to unload it. Before I do, I locate my payment. A canvas bag containing my rations, always a box of eggs and soup cans of differing variety. I like chicken soup, but perusing the labels on the tins, they have not sent any this time. Oxtail, vegetable, and Scotch broth. Wrapped in brown paper, a loaf of bread, and a small selection of apples, enough to last a few days. The time they sent the delivery without my payment, I did not bother to unload. Instead, I pressed the button and returned the cargo. They got the message. They have paid me every time since. My food secured, I begin to unload the bodies. I keep a wheeled cart adjacent to the dock, parked on the cobbles, which I had found in the library. Twice as long as it was wide, it had high steel sides and small caster wheels that rattled over the cobbles and the broken pavements. Once I believe its use was to move around large bags of rubbish, but now it is large enough to transport the dead to their final location. I feel fortunate that my own brush with the virus that attacked my muscles and skeleton did not affect my limbs. I walk with a little limp, that is true, and it ravaged my facial features, but my arms are just as strong. I can lift these admittedly emaciated bodies with ease, transferring them from barge to cart. Flailing legs and arms do throw me a little off balance, but I'm used to that now. I don't even look at their faces any longer. Terrors lurk within their sunken eye sockets and the rictus of their teeth from the drawn-back lips. I like to see how they are dressed. Transmission can occur through touch, so whoever is loading the dead outside the city are not risking the luxury of changing their clothing to something more suitable. The vast majority are still wearing pajamas, dressing gowns, or nightshirts. Now and again, they will wear suits and dresses. I like to imagine these spending their final moments clinging onto a routine where getting dressed is normal, rather than wasting away in a bed. But I can't be sure. Maybe their loved ones did want to risk infection to make sure they had some dignity in death. Regardless, I afford them more dignity through my work, through my art. I have 16 bodies today, 9 men and 7 women. Thankfully, no children. Even I balk at seeing the small, helpless shapes, lives cut short before they had a chance to live it. But on the occasion they do appear, they still have a place in my work. The cathedral is my place for their small, cherubim bodies. Ready? I have a quick check to make sure I have collected everything, before pressing the button just below the throttle handle. I disembark quickly as the barge fires up, and I watch for a moment as it departs, splitting the formed ice as it does. The sound of my trundling cart over cobbles reverberates as I return through the arches. I have an infinite choice of buildings. When I began my work, just after my recovery and arrival in the city, I decided to start at the furthest possible place that I could reach from the collection point. I have locations for individuals that I have from base on their clothing. The majority in their nightclothes I place within the apartments and flats, in beds where possible, but also in any remains of furniture, sofas, in fronts of long defunct televisions and stereos. In later years, before the virus hit, an explosion in residential apartment blocks sprung up, cashing in on having a desirable city centre home. Despite their number and proliferation, they are quickly filling up. I find climbing stairs, the elevators no longer functioned, carrying bodies extremely taxing, but I am comforted when I gaze upon the domestic bliss they represent when positioned. If they wear smart clothing, then offices are my destination for them, sat around boardroom tables, behind large desks, socialising in staff canteens. Plenty of room remained for this population, no shortage of office space here. Evening wear, and even in some cases jewellery, and they will end up in the restaurants and bars. These places feel special to me, a frisson of happier times, though I do not regard them. The day is cold, with the freezing fog lingering and clinging to the city like a wet cotton shirt, so I do not wish to travel far. Already thoughts of my warm fire, spooning hot soup into my broken innards, and escaping harsh reality within the confines of a book fill my mind. I feel justified in my decision to travel further afield during the summer, despite the heat speeding up the decomposition of my deliveries. Thankfully, I have plenty of unfilled places just a short walk away. I start near the old museum, where lies a square of houses surrounded by the frost-encrusted weeds of St. John's Gardens. It is easy for me to gain access to these low, brick-built buildings through the broken doorways. As soon as I enter, the stench assails my sinuses. I lost my sense of during my infection, and my sense of smell is permanently damaged. But what few cell receptors remain are bombarded with cadaverine odour. I must have been here before. It has become hard to remember all the locations I have visited over the months and years. I have no doubt that, to ordinary people, any temptation to come within proximity of the city is soon abandoned once the smell of death reaches them. But I worry during winter, when the cold temperatures slow the decomposition, that the unwary or the curious may return. The city is deadly. Only I can stand to live here. Only I have survived, and it cost me everything. In return, I appear to have immunity to it. This pathogen is particularly hardy. It can survive on surfaces for days and does not respond to any treatment. It merely spreads to whomever administers care without protection. Huge funeral pyres did not destroy it either. Instead, they caused it to become airborne, held suspended in the ashes of the infected. One day soon, the only humanity left will be the representation of normality that I seek to instill here in the city. Sure enough, I find my previous work. Two people sat on dining chairs at opposite ends of the table. I'm surprised they are still in place. As often, I have to reposition the bodies upon my return, as they have moved due to environmental effects. Strong winds often find entry, or because of the state of their putrefaction. These two are just as I left them, facing each other as if holding a dinner-time conversation. I bring two in from my cart, a male and female. They appear to be from an older generation, but it is hard to tell due to the physical damage. Positioning them on the sofa, I used an exposed spring to anchor the man in place, bending it against his hip, and I placed the woman in the armchair. This house is now complete with my double-generation family in a scene of domesticity. Moving northward with my cart, I reach Key Street. I have to maneuver over the curb and onto the road, the shells of cars still parked along the tarmac, long since abandoned. I pause for a second. Should I place one in the driver's seat? I decide against it, as they will be too exposed. The protection afforded by a steel shell is much less than a brick structure. Over the road is the Opera House, however, one of my favourite spots. I make my way through the foyer, dragging the wheels over the threadbare red carpet. I don't have the strength today to carry them up to the circle, so I stay on the ground floor and enter the stalls. Even now, after all these years, a muted sense of awe strikes me as I walk down the aisle towards the stage, past the partially filled rows. The members of the audience gathered for some unknown future performance. I haven't yet discovered what that will be, and I'm hoping future deliveries will present me with some idea of who would make it onto the stage. One of the long curtains hangs from its rafter, and just behind it I can see the outline of cardboard scenery. It looks like a balcony. Maybe the last performance was Romeo and Juliet. I've read it in my library, and the tale of doomed love spoke to me and inspired much of my work. But today's collection was more audience, and plenty of empty seats remain. As the day was growing colder, I decided to put the majority of my load here into the seats, just leaving a couple in my cart, a man and a woman. 12 bodies and 12 remaining seats in the front row. Perfect. I could not have planned it better. They are lucky. The best seats in the house. They will have the best view of all. I position them so their skull visages are looking upwards at the stage, and angle them in the narrow velvet-clad seats so that they will not slip. Once finished, I look back at my handiwork with a certain amount of pride. I'm a attentive audience who will never disturb or heckle the performance. Shortly after, I'm back on the freezing streets. The cart is considerably lighter now, with just 2 bodies remaining, so I can travel a little further. I take a shortcut through the once gleaming office blocks and the bars that the trendy youth frequented when such events mattered. Whenever I walk through this area, I feel the strongest sense of being watched. I know that countless sightless eyes are gazing down at me from those offices, witnessing my every move, hearing the wheels of my cart echoing from building to building. I see my library as I arrive back at Deansgate, and I cross the road to reach my next destination. The library is the only place I leave free of people. That space is for me. It is mine now. It belongs to me, along with the world of knowledge contained within. The dead have no place within its walls. I find myself in Albert Square. The plaza has a few bare trees standing, sentinels to the grand Gothic town hall. The clock tower stands nearly 300 feet above me. The workings, long since defunct, the great Abel bell has not rung since the evacuation of the city at the start of the pandemic. As residents fled the proximity of the infected, I made my way through the pointed archway and into the marble corridors and wood panelling. And on my way to the council chambers, past the busts of long-forgotten Mancunian luminaries and below vaulted ceilings decorated with the shield heraldry of the city. In the chambers, long wooden benches, arranged in a semicircular pattern like an amphitheatre, house those I've chosen to sit on the council. The benches are hard and uncomfortable, but the occupiers don't mind. I add my final male corpse to their number. His rigor mortis is more profound than the others, the stiffness meaning he is supported on the slippery wood suiting. I can even extend his arm to mimic an action. Maybe he is raising a point of order or debating his opinion forcefully. He could be an important councillor or even the mayor. I leave him here, gifting him authority in death. As I return to the square, I see the freezing fog is lifting a little. The buildings are a little clearer, and I perceive the sun as a white circle low above the rooftops. My aching bones and frozen hands hasten my desire to return to my sanctuary, but I have one left, one single delivery to make. The female. I ponder where she should go. The last one is the most difficult, and my thoughts elude me for a moment as an emotion overtakes me. I am proud of my work, but at some point every day, a wave of clarity, a lucid conception of my situation overtakes me. I cry through damaged tear ducts, and the back of my throat aches with the physical realization of grief and the horror of all of it. A memory of a city once alive and vibrant, a beauty I want to recapture. Am I so deluded, so lost in my own pit of despair, that I have to fill this void of what once was? Taking a few deep breaths, the cold air rasps in my lungs, forcing me to cough. I am paralyzed for a few moments until it passes. I may have survived the virus, but my mortality likes to remind me of its presence at any opportunity. This is all I have, a life filled with death. And this is my way of making sense of it all. Let others judge me as they will. Regaining my composure and my breath, I continue pushing the cart back across the square. As I walk, perhaps a location will speak to me and demand the presence. Glancing at the remains of the woman, I see her hair is white. Was she old when she passed, or was she younger? I can see the darkened roots and surmised that she was a younger woman with coloured hair. But looking at the drawn-back features, her age is difficult to assess. She is dressed in a long white nightgown, cotton. It has picked up a few stains from her travails, but it covers her whole body, hiding the worst with the decimation of her flesh, small immerses. Her bony arms emerge from short sleeves, ending but skeletal hands. Here I notice something that stirs an emotion within me. A silver ring. Still bound to her left finger, the bone of her knuckle preventing its slippage. A pause as feeling wells within me. What is that? Nostalgia? Recognition? For the first time since I started, this strong sense stops me in my tracks. Her backstory lost in the confines of my memory and the damaged synapses of my brain. She deserves a special place, a unique place. I know just the spot. I cross onto Bridge Street. Further along, the road continues over the River Irwell, and at the far end, a covered stairwell sits. Descending down from the street, the stairs, covered by an archway of plexiglass, have a door to gain entry. As gently as I can, I take hold of the woman, putting my arms around her torso through her armpits. Walking backwards, I take each step one at a time and go down to the river level, her bare feet striking the floor. A rectangular room sits at the bottom, empty. I have been waiting for the right one for this place. The burgundy carpet is relatively clean, as is the glass that overhangs this side of the water, affording a view downstream. Built into the room are red brick arches fitted with padded seating, suggesting that this was once a restaurant or bar. Fixed tables still sit adjacent to the windows. On the far corner of the glass wall, a single armchair sits at the right angle, next to a side table. I place her here, giving her a panoramic view. She nestles into the deep, foam-filled fabric, and I let her arms onto the rest, and her feet sit on the cushion stool. The silver ring glistens in the bright, cold daylight. As I position her, a swan approaches to land on the river, forming from the overhead mist. Wings outstretched, it seems to glide in slow motion. A thin film of ice covers the water, but as the swan's black webbed feet strike, it cracks and divides to welcome the nature it provides for. As it lands, the snow wings rise in an inverted heart-shaped crest before folding down behind a slender neck. Settled, it floats towards us with elegance. We share this moment, my river goddess and I. Beauty through art and circumstance. It takes away my breath and brings meaning to me. Is this now done? Have I completed my masterwork? A part of me knows the answer already. I will never be done. This is now my life. It is my legacy on the world, the only task I have left. Those who remain will not accept me, but I have linked my own survival to my art. I hold her hand, and it is as cold as my own. She is an important part of it all. She is the focus. She is my river goddess. The wind never ceases. It howls across the barren moors, carrying with it the chill of forgotten times and the whispers of the lost. Fog rolls in thick and unrelenting, shrouding our solitary farm in an eternal twilight. This is my entire world now. It is a desolate remnant of what once was, and I share it with Emily, my silent companion. In the aftermath of the Holocaust that scorched the earth and sky, we have found a fragile sanctuary atop these wind-swept hills. The farmhouse, weathered and sturdy, built like the very rocks of the ground, stands as a testament to resilience. It is our refuge, our haven against the chaos that consumed the world. Emily, my mute wife, is my anchor in this storm. Though she cannot speak, her presence is a comfort that words could never provide. Her dark eyes communicate a depth of understanding that transcends language. We live a simple life, relying on the still fertile soil to grow our food. Potatoes, carrots, onions, and beets keep us nourished, a constant vegetable broth steaming over the peat fire. We met before. Although my memory fades, blown away like the brown leaves of autumn, I recall a time. It is golden in my mind. Emily's face happy and smiling, laughter filling our days. We picked strawberries from the ground and drank wine from crystal glasses. When we married, she looked like an angel. Life felt carefree then. We have survived here in the years following, eking out our existence on the very edge of what life remains. Solitude is our constant enemy. I believe that we are the only ones left alive. Not one other soul has visited since everything changed. Living in a depression of the land at the summit of the remote moors protected us. I often think about those we lost all those years ago. The lucky ones, gone in a flash. The hardship of survival no longer a problem. The nights are hard up here on the roof of the world. The wind howls like a tormented spirit, rattling the windows and seeping through the cracks in the walls. Most nights I lie awake, listening to the gale outside, feeling Emily's presence beside me. Her steady breathing a reminder that, in this shattered world, we still have each other. Since that day, she lost the ability to speak, her voice the price paid for the ultimate trauma. Yet here we are, the survivors. Life must go on in the hope of a better tomorrow. As I muse, the evening draws in. We are sat in the kitchen. The windows in this stone cottage are small, square portholes to the world outside, and I draw the curtains together against the storm. On this night it is particularly violent. We sit up in the clouds where the wind and rain have no barrier to their ferocity, and tonight the moon and stars are obscured by the turbulent air. I fill 2 bowls with our stew from the pot, trying to ignore the wind's fury. Handing one to Emily, she lifts up her spoon, a look of fear in her eyes. "Don't worry, my darling," I say. "This house is strong. It will take more than a storm to bring it down." I speak with confidence, and yet the frames rattle, and the oak doorway strains on its hinges. I can feel the cold draft seeping through the cracks. I wrap my arms around her shoulders to ward against her fear. After our dinner, we decide to bed down for the night to see out the storm. Emily and I huddle together in bed, seeking solace in each other's presence. I hold her close, my head to her chest, hearing the steady thump of her heartbeat as she sleeps. As I listen to the howling gale, slumber takes me too. I can never recall my dreams, but as the night passes, the noise around the cottage gives me night terrors. The wind's a reminder of that night so many years ago, my brain tormenting me with the memory. I awake with a start. I wait a few moments for my racing pulse to settle. It is calm. The storm passed in the night. I close my eyes and breathe deeply in the silence. I notice that Emily is gone. I call her name, knowing that she would not reply, but would perhaps show herself in the doorframe of the bedroom. Nothing, not even the sound of her moving around the house. I get out of bed, frowning, and pull on my trousers and threadbare woolen sweater over my undershirt. I call her name again. Panic seizes me as I search the house. Each room is empty, the bed cold where she once lay. Her clothes still sat in the wardrobe where she left them. I rush outside. A fog replaced the storm, thick and murky. I scan through the mist for any sign of her, trying to part the vapor with my hands. Why would she leave in the night? What could she be searching for? Emily had vanished, and I am left alone with the wind and the fog. Returning to the cottage, the fire had died down during the night. No pot sat on the table. She had not eaten before she departed. Feeling miserable, I sit with my head in my hands, wondering why she would leave. We had lived here for what felt like years. Seasons passed, and we managed, together, to make a life for ourselves. Had she found somewhere else to go? Anywhere beyond this dell would be dangerous due to the poison borne on the breeze. I should go out and look for her. Glancing out of the window as the morning passed, the fog was thinning, and I could see the cold white disk of the sun trying to burn through. Leaving the cottage, I venture outside. First going into our garden, where we grow our vegetables, I search around the green stalks and bushes. I often find her here, tending to the plants, along with Emily's small flower bed sat where the tilled earth meets the wild heather. but no sign. I search all around the cottage. The broken-down stone wall marks the boundary. I had been meaning to fix that. My mind races. Why would she leave? We have enough food for the two of us. Our life is lonely up here, but we have each other. That was all that mattered to me. Did she crave more? Did she want to find other survivors out there in the land beyond the moors? She would only find death and destruction, a land poisoned by the hubris of humanity. I needed to find her. My single purpose was to keep her safe. The continuation of my existence depended on making sure she came to no harm. Venturing out of the dell, as the cold sun passes overhead, I go up to the summit. I shiver as I look upon the bleak hills surrounding. Not a single sign of life. I call her name over and over again, until my voice is hoarse, my cry borne on the breeze. The brown bracken merges with the purple heather that covers the moors, but that remained the only sign that life still clung here. I turn my back and look down to the cottage. It stands lonely, with a little smoke drifting out of the chimney. A dark and solitary place. Should I go further? A part of me believes that Emily needed to get away to clear her head. Being cooped up on our little area of moorland can become oppressive. Maybe she wanted to feel the expanse of land and sky. Maybe she felt she could find others like us. She could not communicate these thoughts to me. Although I have known her for such a long time, I feel I would have known if she were unhappy. Did I cling to her too tightly? Is she trying to escape me? Perhaps my own compassion for her felt cloying. These doubts run through my mind as I search the horizon. But I reach the conclusion that once she realizes that there is nothing out there, she will return. We will eat our stew and resume our life together. I return to the cottage, resolving to give her a little time to herself. Entering the parlor, I select one of my books. I've read them all countless times, often reading them out loud so Emily can listen, but I need to distract myself from the concern I hold for her. As the afternoon wears on, the wind begins to grow once again, its malevolent presence taunting me with whispers. We seldom have respite from it. Every few minutes I look up from the page, expecting the door to open to the framed figure of Emily, standing with grateful eyes. I will forgive her immediately, grateful for her return, and we will eat supper together. But I continue waiting as the sun begins to disappear over the ridge. Mystified, I am gripped by a new fear. What if she went out in the early morning to gather flowers? She often goes up to the higher ground to look for plants she can grow in her flower bed. Did she go to gather more? Could she have had a fall and is in need of help? She could not cry out. She may even be unconscious. Overcome with a sudden alarm, I raise out of my chair and rush back outside. How could I be so stupid? The wind whips at my hair and hisses in my ears. In the fading light, I mount the slope leading up to the ridge line. I know where Emily goes to find her flowers. It is on the hillside summit in front of the house. Once a single ash tree stood as a sentinel on the spot, but now just a broken stump remains. Around its base, a collection of violets, foxgloves, and buttercups now grow. I race to this spot up the well-worn path. Rain begins to fall, gentle at first, but growing in intensity. It feels greasy, dirty, a corruption of the weather. As I reach the summit, I am soaked, and my boots sink into the mud, making my progress difficult. A distant rumble reaches my ears, warning me of the approaching thunder. Frantically, I search around the tree. The wildflowers grow here in abundance. They have not been harvested recently. I call her name once again. Where can she be? Depression and misery overwhelms me, makes my head spin, and I grab the tree stump to keep my balance. I rest my back on it before sinking to my haunches, ignoring the lash of the rain. Around me, puddles form with rivulets between them. The water flow gathers the peaty soil around, washing it away down the slope of the hill. A flash makes me jump, followed by a crash of thunder almost immediately after. I am blinded for a moment, but as my eyes adjust, I see the ground near my feet is being washed away by the torrent. The rain creates a waterfall over my brows, but through my sodden vision, I see a shape being exposed from the loosening soil. I hold my breath as my mind reels. An ordinary day in the cottage. Emily and I were in our first year of marriage, making our remote location a home. She always woke early before me and liked to walk at the summit of the moor to take in the morning air. As she left this morning, I woke as the door closed behind her. Smiling, I decided to make breakfast for her return. I was so happy. She was eating for two. In the kitchen, I gather the pan and grill plate with eggs and bacon. I grabbed a knife to slice the loaf sat on the sideboard. Glancing through the window, I saw her on the ridge near the ash tree. She couldn't possibly see me from her vantage, but she knew I would be looking, and she waved. A flash, followed by another and another. Like lightning, but far more insidious. A low rumble becoming louder. The gale hit, blasting over the dell from different locations. A tsunami of intense heat and power, causing the ground to shake beneath my feet. Emily stood, her hand held high as it struck. Her image imprinted on my mind as a photographic negative. The cottage sheltered from the shock wave, but my mind taking the full force of it. I am soaked, but I can't move. Can't stop looking at what the earth is revealing. A hand, dirtied by the soil, wearing a wedding ring. I moan as the pain of memory returns. No, this did not happen. I collapse into the storm, welcoming the oblivion it brought. When I wake, it is morning again. I am wet and cold, covered in dirt. Shivering, I take a look around but cannot see much due to the heavy mist. Look at me, I am filthy. Emily will not like that. I need to clean myself up before breakfast. Standing, I make my way back to the ridge and locate the pathway back down to the cottage. I slide down the still damp track and reach the broken down stone wall. I need to fix that. In front of me, the cottage door sits ajar. Waiting for me, framed in the doorway, stands Emily. She smiles at me. She is forever young. The rain never stops. It beats against my walls, slipping through cracks in my once proud stone, pooling on the floors where grand footsteps used to echo. I remember the days of sunshine, when warmth poured through my tall windows and laughed against of my polished marble floors. I was a masterpiece then, a grand hotel, the Imperial, sat upon the shoreline at this long-forgotten seaside resort. In times gone, I drew people from across our island nation to marvel at my Gothic splendor, to dance in my ballroom and gaze at the endless sea. But now I stand in ruin. The world outside has become a wasteland of grey, wet despair, and the relentless rain has turned everything to rot. Rain often frequented this coastline, but something changed. Whispers of a climate emergency, a warming planet, and the once-in-a-while downpour became permanent. My gutters overflowing with the constant deluge. Society collapsed. Crops failed due to food water, and the people left. I remained a crumbling ruin. On my frontage, the letters of my name fell, Yet I persist. I am the Imperial, and my walls are still providing shelter, though they sag with the weight of time and neglect. Inside he walks through my empty halls, his heavy boots thudding on floors that were once polished to a gleam. He clings to me as a sanctuary, and I protect them as best I can. I feel every step, every creak of the old wooden stairs as he moves through me, always vigilant, always ready to defend. This man, Samuel, he patrols my halls as a guardian, keeping out the desperate souls who would do anything for the treasure sacked in my bowels. People are no longer interested in precious metals or gleaming jewels. Instead, the treasure is sustenance. Food to last decades sits within my larder, stored in boxes piled high, together with gas canisters to ignite my ovens. He's rigged me with traps, with bottles that shatter in the night if someone tries to sneak in. Just outside my walls, he has constructed a barricade of junk to hinder anyone that may seek to take what is his. I sense his tension, the way he listens for intruders, ready to fight for the small bits of life they've managed to hold on to within my decaying walls. Evelyn is upstairs in what was once my finest room, the bridal suite with its sweeping view of the sea. She was once as lively as the sun that used to shine through my windows, but now she lies frail and weak, the rain and damp having invaded her lungs and stolen her strength. Samuel tends to her with a tenderness that softens the edges of this harsh new world. I feel his presence beside her, the weight of his love as he cares for her, and I try to offer what comfort I can through the shelter of my walls, though I am no longer the refuge I once was. He feeds her nourishing soup, heated up in my kitchens, with an oven hooked up to the gas canisters I have in storage. She looks upon him gratefully as he brings the spoon to her lips. I watch over them as the storm outside rages on, the sea churning and flooding the promenade below. Once I glimpsed the moon through a break in the clouds, a fleeting moment of beauty that I treasure in the midst of this endless grey. Samuel, too, finds moments of peace within my walls, resting in the chair by the window as the rain lulls him to sleep. But peace is a fleeting thing now, and danger lurks outside my crumbling doors. The desperates come, drawn by the promise of food, and I brace myself for the violence that always follows. Tonight I sense them, intruders, slipping past the broken barriers outside. Samuel hears it too, the sound of a bottle smashing, and he moves through me with purpose, descending the grand staircase. I want to warn him of the runes in the hearts of these thieves, but he is duped into investigating the noise. He leaves Evelyn alone, asleep on her bed, and as his bulky frame descends through the darkness to the lobby, I feel the sharp hook latch upon the balcony outside her window. Tension pervades the damp atmosphere as he confronts the intruder in my lobby, a thin, starving man with a knife, desperate and dangerous. I watch as Samuel tries to reason with him, demanding that he leaves, but the man's hunger has driven him to desperation. But then, as Samuel hears a cry of alarm from the room above, the thief looks back with a wicked grin. Taking the stairs two at a time, Samuel rushes back up the grand staircase to his beloved Evelyn. Bursting into the suite, he sees her on the bed, eyes wide with fear, as a second thief holds a shiv to her throat. The assailant spits a threat to the large man, the meaning clear. Give us all your food, or she won't last the night. For a moment, an oppressive silence descends upon them, broken only by the sound of constant rainfall against my walls. The skinny intruder followed Samuel up the stairs, ready to be taken to my larder. Speaking to his accomplice, he agrees to shout a warning should Samuel try anything. Evelyn will be dead before Samuel could return. He now had no alternative, and yet, in Samuel's mind, the theft of their food would also be a death sentence. Evelyn's fragile health and the cold wetness of my dilapidation meant they needed the sustenance to warm their bodies, But Samuel was nothing if not patient. He would bide his time. He would wait for the right opportunity. And he had no compunction about spilling their blood upon my rotten floorboards. Samuel descends to the lobby. I can feel the weight of his decision hanging in the air, thick and heavy like the clinging dampness. He's made his choice. I know him well enough by now to recognize that he's ready for violence, that he sees no other way. His traps lay set all around. They are simple things but deadly. Broken glass in the hallways, sharpened metal hidden beneath soaked carpets, and, deep in the heart of my larder, an empty old gas canister suspended high, mated to a tripwire. He has planned for this moment. He has prepared. The intruders have not. I feel him pause in the centre of my lobby, just beneath the grand chandelier that once cast brilliant light over the elegant parties, where men and women danced and laughed and whispered secrets to one another. It hangs dark and lifeless, as dim as the world outside. Samuel's breath is steady, but I know him well enough to sense the storm growing inside him. He is listening, waiting, as the rain continues to fall in steady sheets against the glass. The skinny intruder moves cautiously, wary of Samuel's intent, and yet confident that he would not risk the life of his beloved. I feel every step they take, every shift of weight on my old floorboards. The invader is thin, starving, his movements sharp and desperate. I sense the blade in his hand, ready to strike, a crude weapon fashioned from scrap metal. He has nothing left but this moment, this one chance to take what he needs to survive. They reach the larder, deep in my bowels, where the air is damp and thick with the smell of rust and decay. The larder has metal walls to preserve the contents, to keep them fresh. No sound can come from within. Once this room is filled with the finest delicacies, imported cheeses, wines and spices from distant lands, stored here for my guests to enjoy as they looked out over the sparkling sea. Now, it is a cold, dark place, where boxes of preserved food are stacked high, and death waits in the shadows. Samuel stops at the entrance, and the intruder steps inside, his eyes dancing around, searching for his prize. He doesn't see the trap, or the tripwire that Samuel set days ago. The man takes another step forward, eager to claim what is his, and his calf is snagged on the tripwire. The falling steel canister strikes the side of his skull. The intruder is thrown against the far wall, his body crumpling in a heap. Rushing inside, Samuel grabs the empty canister and lifts it over his head, ready to deliver the killing blow. But it is not necessary. The thief is already dead. Dropping the canister, Samuel lifts the body easily and removes it from the larder. As quietly as possible, he places it in a disused room, where the blood mingles with the pools springing from my leaky ceilings. Samuel stands for a moment, breathing heavily. He turns and leaves, climbing back up the stairs, his mind already on the second intruder, the one holding Evelyn captive. I feel his resolve harden with every step he takes, his body moving with a purpose. He cannot lose her, not after everything. He reaches the suite, and the door swings open. Inside, Evelyn lies on the bed, pale and fragile, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The second intruder is standing over her, a crude shape still held to her throat. The man looks up as Samuel enters, fear growing in his eyes as he realizes his partner is gone. For a moment, everything is still. The only sound is the rain, beating against the windows, a steady, relentless rhythm that fills the room with its oppressive weight. Samuel stands in the doorway, his eyes locked on the man who holds Evelyn's life in his hands. Then, something shifts. I feel it in the air, a subtle change in the tension that hangs between them. The intruder senses it too, and for a brief moment, his grip on the ship falters as he realizes he is now alone. The intruder hesitates, his eyes flicking between Samuel and Evelyn. He seems to be weighing his options, calculating the risks. If he kills her, he will die. He now knows this. The chance of getting any food has evaporated. the best he can hope for is to escape. My bridal suite has a door connecting the next bedroom. Sensing the changing of the tide, the thief decides to run. In a flash, he dives towards the door and vanishes into the room beyond. Samuel cannot let this stand. If he manages to escape, he will be back. He will return more prepared as hunger drives desperation. He cannot leave. He must be punished, lest my position weaken. Before pursuing, Samuel checks Evelyn. She is shaken, but otherwise unharmed. Her shattered fragility fuels his rage. The thief has a head start, but Samuel's knowledge of my layout played to his advantage. The adjacent room just led back out to the corridor, so I return to the landing at the top of the grand staircase. The thief bursts from the room and halts as they lock eyes. He reverses and flees away from Samuel, heading into my labyrinth of rooms and corridors, hoping to find another exit. Giving chase, Samuel's heavy-set footsteps clumped over the wooden flooring. At the end of the corridor, a fire escape staircase led to the ground floor, but it lies blocked with old bed frames and furniture, Samuel deliberately restricting the entryways to my livable areas. It forces the thief upstairs, his legs rabbiting. On his heels, Samuel follows close behind. The thief turns and throws his shiv at Samuel. The blanche man dodges, but then slips on the damp surface, bounding forward onto my steps. The blade misses, but Samuel takes a heavy fall. Winded, he curses under his breath, before pushing himself up and resuming the hunt. With his pursuer delayed, the thief manages to put a few seconds between them. He continues to climb, hoping to reach the roof, perhaps to find a place he could climb down and flee. On my top floor, however, he finds the deluge damage extensive. The permanent downpour finds entryway everywhere, turning what were once the quarters for my staff into a series of rain-fed waterfalls. Splashing through the puddles, he finds a place to hide in one of the derelict's rooms. Samuel breathes heavily as he reaches the top floor. Stopping, he listens for any telltale signs of his quarry's whereabouts. A splash or an interruption to the flow of water onto rotten wood, but all he hears is the sound of flooding. Walking steadily and catching the breath in his lungs, Samuel begins his search. Knowing that I had no other exits from this floor, he knew the thief had to be here somewhere. The water falls onto his long, unkempt hair, getting into his eyes and pooling in his ear canals. If only I could cry out a warning as he approaches the spot where the intruder hides in wait, wooden plank in hand, ready to strike. But it is too late. As Samuel peers into a neighbouring room, the thief strikes. He brings the plank down hard upon Samuel's shoulders, and it splinters into 1,000 shards. The large man collapses to my floor with a grunt, his head spinning as he verges on the edge of consciousness, his body and limbs failing him as he lies helpless. The thief is away, back the way he came. With Samuel out of action, he can take all the food he can carry. Maybe he will even fulfill his threat to Evelyn as punishment for Samuel's actions. Remind him of the harsh, unforgiving world we now live in. Samuel tries to raise himself, but stumbles as the pain overwhelms him. But even in this rain-soaked world, I can still offer benevolence to my patrons. As the intruder makes his way back to the staircase, his feet found a weak spot on the floorboards, a place where the water leaks pounded my construction. The damaged flooring gives way under his weight, and with a cry, he falls. The descending water, obeying gravity, are a precursor to the falling thief, and as he lands on the floor below, that, too, gives way, the flood following his vertical crash through my bones. Onward he falls, striking into every floor, the force of his descent growing with every level he smashes. Finally, through a fog of dust, wood, masonry, and rain splash, he crashes through the high ceiling of my ballroom, landing with a sickening thud on the remains of the old piano. Back on the top floor, Samuel comes around and drags himself up, with his hands climbing the exposed wood panelling in my walls. Walking over to the hole in the ground, he looks gingerly down through the vertical drop to the body several floors below. Careful of his own footing, He reaches the stairs and returns to Evelyn. Tears of relief spring from her eyes as she sees him, flowing down her cheeks like the rain on my windows, and he embraces her. As the dawn breaks, as they find comfort in each other's presence, and for the first time in months, the clouds shift momentarily, parting to provide a shaft of golden morning sunlight as it breaks over the coast, to shine through their window and into their suite. A calmness descends upon them. They are safe for the moment. How did I come to be here? What level of amnesia have I suffered not to recall anything? Why do I not remember? I am standing at a fairground, and I am alone. It is daytime, but a thick cloud hangs over this park, and fog drifts around me, making everything indistinct and hazy. My initial confusion is replaced by another awareness: excitement. I love being here, amongst the wooden rides and amusements. The fair is a place full of fun and enjoyment. It is a place of joy to me. Maybe if I explore a little, I will discover why I am on my own and remember how I came to be here. I have a ride just ahead of me. It is a roller coaster, a small one made of wood, and as I watch, I can see the solitary cars whizzing around its tracks, their wheels clacking over the rails. Nobody rides this coaster, and no attendants stand to take my ticket. I have the whole place to myself. I approach, excited at the thrill I am about to experience. I enter the queue path and follow the ramp as it leads up to the station, using my hands to pull myself along the painted wooden banister. As I enter the platform, I notice the cabin that houses the ride workings. Lights flash and gears spin, but it is operating remotely. It seems not to need any human hands to work. A car sits ready for me at the station, with its iron bar raised for me to gain entry. I do so, and sit on the hard wooden chair, lifting my hands as the bar lowers down to my lap, securing me in place. With a jolt, I am off. I reach the end of the station and follow a shallow bend around to the rear of the coaster. I am yanked back in my seat as the car hits the chain lift, and am thrown backwards in my seat as it climbs the vertiginous hill. The rattle of the toothed cable loud in my ears. As I am raised, I look around to see the park in full operation. The horses on the carousel going up and down as they spin, and the wheels and cogs of the funhouse turning. And yet nobody is on them. I have the fairground to myself. No queues, no waiting, no money needed. Just me given a free rein to go on whatever I like. The car crests the summit of the hill, and a slight dip speeds me around the top level. The noise of the chain lift vanishes. My anticipation builds as I see the first big drop ahead, and I steel myself, holding on to the lamp bar tightly. I feel a sense of the inevitable as a track takes me around to it, as though I cannot escape what was to come ahead. The car seems to slow a little before the dip, but then it arrives. I feel the air rushed by my ears as the speed grows, blurring all around me in a whoosh. And as the track levels, I am forced downwards. Almost immediately, I am rising again on the other side of the drop. but as I crest, it drops once again. I am weightless for a moment before the rapidity of the car presses on me once again. I am travelling very fast now, and the car is not gentle as it throws me around quick bends, sudden drops, and an inclined section where I am thrown to the side. Left and right, up and down, the car races along its predetermined path, its metal wheels screeching over the rails. The final section, back at ground level, takes me over a series of bumps before turning onto a straight section. Here, the brakes work, jerking me forward and slowing the car as it idles back to the station. The lamp banner raises, allowing me to leave, and, exhilarated from the ride, I enter the coaster down a wooden ramp. I collect myself and look around for my next thrill. I try to ignore the growing sense of anxiety building within me, sure that an explanation for my presence in this fairground would reveal itself in due time. Wandering around the park, I walk along the carousel as it pipes the funfair organ music, the horses jumping imaginary fences as they spin. I stop to watch for a moment, contemplating getting on, but it seems the merry-go-round is not stopping anytime soon, so I move on. Then, up ahead, I spot the Ferris wheel. The wooden spokes peel with white paint, with the struts anchored to the base. As I approach, the wheel slows enough for me to sit on the ground-level gondola. I take my seat quickly, my legs dangling over the edge, and I pull down the bar to prevent me from slipping out. The gondola sat too, but the seat next to me remains empty, and I still cannot see any attendants. My hope, as I hear the engine whine increase, is that the wheel takes me to a point where I can see what lies around me, give me an idea of my location. The velocity increases as I rotate upwards, feeling the rush of air, and I see the park spread out below. I am more interested in what lies beyond the fairground, and as the wheel summits, I try to discern the landscape through the surrounding mists. As I go over the top, a seaside vista confronts me. Beyond the front of the park, I see a deserted road set on an embankment. Next to this, an expanse of water drifts away, the horizon lost in the fog. The spin takes me down, the circular motion rushing past the entrance, the motor loud in my ears, before I rise again. On my second summit, I look on either side. Rocky headlands rise up, flanking the fairground, jutting out into the sea on both the north and south sides. These twin bluffs extend the length of the park and meet behind it, the hill peaks lost in the thick atmosphere. The wheel rotates me a couple more times, and on each pivot I take in my surroundings, affirming the fact that I am alone here. No people, no cars, no boats on the water. How could that be? On the final spin, the wheel slows and I jump from a gondola as it hits the station. Another feeling of unease pervades my senses. I explore further there, hoping to find someone to speak to, or some clue as to why I am here. Up ahead is the fair's central plaza, a large square with benches and litter pins. Around the edges, gaudy stalls selling candy floss, ice creams and sweets stand empty. In the centre of the plaza, a glass cage entreats me, and I approach to take a look inside. What greets me is an animatronic clown, sat on a wooden throne, with a smaller clown sat on his knee. Wearing a red clown outfit with white overly ruffled cuffs and collars, it has a large red nose and mild orange hair. The workings spin the throne around, and the clown throws himself about in a realistic fashion, as though mocking all those who look upon him. Even the smaller clown on his lap appears to be deriding me. A most disturbing laugh emerges from the speakers. It is a constant, throaty laugh. It never stops. At times it sounds as though it is struggling for breath, rising and falling in pitch, but carries on laughing with its wild-eyed insanity. I back away, never taking my eyes from it. I cannot define why it scares me so much, this robot clown in a glass cage, but it speaks to me of hysteria and terror. As I backpedal, the laughter fades and I turn away from it. As I turn, I am faced with the next ride. It is a ghost train. The front has a sharp queue platform to an open-air station. It is decorated with all manner of creepy imagery, from skeletons, cobweb spiders, witches on broomsticks, and vampires with blood-soaked fangs. They are animated from unseen mechanical workings. I cannot see the whole ride due to the fog, which appears to billow from the ghost train itself, filling the spaces around me. I approach the station, and from the dark exit of the ride, the car arrives on the rails. It is painted a dirty green, and is circular with padded seats and a lap bar. Driven by the track, the car turns to face me, inviting me to sit. I stand for a moment, contemplating this sense of dread. From the interior, I can hear screams of pure terror, mixed with the electronic whizzes and evil cackles. I cannot be sure the screams are part of the ride. I do not want to go on. It fills me with a horror I cannot comprehend. I need to leave now, get out of this park and return home. That's it. I need to go home now. I've had my fun. Leaving the ghost train behind, I notice the car departing the station and enter the darkness of the ride as I do so. I give the Laughing Clown a wide berth and head towards the front of the park to the exit. As I near, an arcade building sits, full of slot machines and electronic games. I do not enter, but the windows strobe a variety of colours and the sound of pips and beeps emerge. At the entrance to the park, a large wrought iron gate sits. The iron lettering through the double-gated entrance is split into fun and fair on either side, and offers me no clue as to where I am. Next to the gate, an empty helter-skelter stands, its riding mats stacked haphazardly at its base. I leave the park, the noise is fading away, and find myself on the road that runs along the embankment. Ahead, the milky sea comes right up to the stone wall. The tide must be in at the moment. Which way do I go? Left or right? Left to the north headland, or right to the rocky outcropping at the south of the road. I saw no town from the Ferris wheel, so my choice is arbitrary. I turn left and begin to walk up the road. I hear my footsteps along the tarmac, and with no traffic, I walk down the middle of the road, looking around me for any hints to my whereabouts. I get colder as I walk, and the mist closes around me. I keep the rocks to my left, and the road curves around it. As the fog thickens, I move to the side so I can keep sight of the land. I can't hear the funfair now. I've left it far behind, with foggy headland blocking my view of it. Shivering, I continue to walk forward, wondering where this path will take me. A few steps later, I start to feel a little warmer, and the mists begin to clear. As I spot what lies ahead, a low moan escapes my lips. A cloudy air parts, and I realize I am walking back towards the funfair. I am approaching it from the south headland. Fear envelops me as I plod forward. I cannot escape. Everything I am is now tied to this place. I feel I have lost control of my actions, my steps guiding me back, and I arrive at the gates where the helter-skelter greets me. Shall I get a mat, climb to the top, and slide back down it? No, not now. I know where I need to be. Walking back through the fairground, I ignore the other attractions, ignore the flashing lights and insane noises. I enter the plaza and fix the Laughing Clown with a stare of horror. It is looking right at me, not moving at all, and laughing maniacally. My destination lies beyond it, and as I walk past, it rotates on its throne, keeping its evil eye upon me. Up ahead is the ghost train, swathed in the fog. Just as before, as I near, a car arrives and spins to face me on the track, its iron lap lifting. This time, I step in and take my seat. The bar lowers, and the car begins to ride towards the black tunnel. Images of fire and black smoke arrive in my thoughts as I stare at the tunnel that leads me back inside. Choking fog, I cannot breathe. I wonder whether I am in a dream, like comatose, or whether I am here for eternity, destined to haunt this place. It happened to me here, on this ride, inside, amongst the mechanical monsters. Something dreadful, a terror I have to face. As the car moves forward, I enter the darkness. A cold night greets me as I step out of my door, my breath fogging. I am dressed in a black suit and shoes that I only wear when the moon is full and when I head out into the ruined city. The night is clear, but the temperature is low. The circle of the moon shines brightly over the rubble and the detritus, but it sits low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows. Over my suit, I wear Anton's thick black cloak against the chill, and I glance up to see the night sky punctuated with countless starfield. Gathering the cloak around my slender frame, my fond memories of him returned, and I closed my door behind me. He wouldn't mind me wearing his cloak to keep me warm. We always loved to dress up for the right occasion. My destination lies further into the city, and my feet clap against the broken stone paving as I head to the bottom of my once tree-lined street. The step is irregular due to my limp, and I carry a black cane with a silver topper to aid my movement. Still, the cold penetrates my muscles, and I feel the ache in my legs. Crumbling masonry sits around me, outlined in the shadows like haunted ziggurats. My own home, the only building that remains standing on this street. Not many visit this part of the city any longer, and I survive with my small vegetable patch and chicken coop. Reaching the end of my row, I look down the road that heads towards the city centre. Red lights dot the once thriving thoroughfare, barrels of flame, where the remnants of humanity gather to warm their hands. I see their flickering silhouettes huddling around for warmth. I do not wish to disturb their evenings, and I know a faster route to my destination through the park ahead. Nobody remains to tend the gardens any longer, and it sits overgrown, nature claiming back this space with uncontrolled chaos. Ivy covers all, interspersed with brambles and weeds, but the vestiges of monuments linger between them. Stone blocks litter the ground, covered with vines, and in the centre of the park, an ancient bandstand sits. Recalling my youth, I used to sit here to watch people play their brass instruments and pound their snare drums. The music stayed with me through life, affording me moments of calm and solace. I walk through the long shadow of this stage, noticing the thorns that now twist around its wooden structure. The only sound I now hear is my own irregular gait. But what was that? Did I hear other footsteps? I pause, wondering if these sounds were just an echo of my own. Turning my head to the side, I strain my hearing to see if I can discern any sound of being trailed. I grip a little tighter on my cane. But I hear nothing but the chill breeze through the twisted overgrowth. Continuing on, I make my way through the park to the main entrance near my destination. 2 stone lions guard the once proud wrought iron gates, now fallen into disrepair. I walk through the gate opening, past the gaze of the steadfast lions, always alert despite the times we now find ourselves living through. As I cross the street and into the city, a few lost souls drift around. Busy with their own concerns, they shuffle along the cracked paving. They may as well be apparitions made of flesh, following a routine laid down to them in the before times. I avoid them as much as I can, not meeting their plaintive stares, and make my way further into the town. The buildings here are more damaged, broken teeth against the night sky, and I have to pick my way through the rubble. Eventually, I catch sight of my destination, and my heart lifts. The theatre stands, although in a state of disrepair. Miraculously, it survived the worst of the destruction, standing as a lone sentinel in the midst of ruin. Its entrance greets me with stone pillars and worn steps, and I enter into the dark foyer, where a once red carpet sits threadbare and blackened with dirt. As I enter, a few other like-minded survivors also arrive. We are all dressed formally in our suits, and many of the ladies wear long gowns. I see a young lady drift by, dressed from head to toe in an off-white dress of lace. Our faces are ghostly pale, as though powdered, and we move like shadows into the circle silently. The gatherers sit apart. We come not to revel in each other's company, but to sit and contemplate our loneliness amongst our memories. I sit in my usual spot, halfway down the central aisle and across into the middle. I find this is the sweet spot for the sound around this amphitheatre. As I settle in my velvet seat, I rest my cane on the one adjacent and loosen the cloak around my neck. I glance around and see the disparate audience settling for this next full moon performance. Ahead of me sits a stage where a row of chairs are gathered in a hemisphere. The roof is smashed, a gaping hole allowing the moonlight to filter down, illuminating the stage as a silvery spotlight. I don't have to wait long before the musicians enter from backstage and take their seats. Violins, cellos, and a double bass make up the strings, along with a woodwind section featuring an oboe, flute, and whistles. Trumpeters and trombonists make up the brass. A single percussionist sits behind them, with drumsticks ready in hand. As they enter, no applause springs from the audience. Gone is the world of celebration and praise, replaced with a simple need of escape, even for a brief time. Finally, a man dressed in a long-tailed jacket enters and takes his place on the podium in front of the small orchestra. He holds a baton in his hands, with which he taps on the lectern, bringing the musicians to order. I brace myself, ready for the forthcoming performance, as a starving man would a meal. The performance begins with a discordant series of notes as they find the feel of their instruments. The conductor raises his baton, readying them to begin, a maestro at work. The first note hangs in the air, delicate as a whisper, yet heavy with promise. Strings tremble beneath the bows, coaxing an otherworldly sound. It wraps around the audience as a breath held too long, waiting to exhale. Every vibration crawls over the skin, seeps into the bones. The slow pull of the cello is a heartstring being tugged, a silent ache. I am transported. Time means nothing to me while they play. Forgetting my struggle for survival, the music takes me to a happier time. Memories of Anton, he and I living together before the end, before the bombs came. As the music swells, the brass erupts and the air thickens. The sound is almost too much, overwhelming in its beauty, as if each note scrapes at something raw and vulnerable inside. I feel it in my chest, the deep rumble of the bass reverberating through me, pulling me under, taking me elsewhere. Often we came to this place together, this theatre a second home to us, a place we can enjoy plays and operas. And yes, we listen to the orchestras playing symphonies and classical pieces that we loved. Then my memories enhanced as the violins soared. Their piercing cry stirred the deep beneath my weight of existence. Memories, emotions I thought forgotten, came rushing forward, unbidden. Tears sprung from my eyes at their recollection. That final morning, I bid him goodbye as he departed to his role in the City Art Gallery, while I remained at home to write my novels, neither of us knowing it was for the final time. The conductor's baton slices through the air with precision, a sculptor carving sound. Each bar a wave crashing over me, relentless, cleansing. The intensity grows, yet the musicians hold it together, spinning chaos into order, binding me to every rise and fall of the melody. And then it softens. The violins whisper again, and the horns become a distant echo. I hear the silence between the notes, alive with meaning. It lingers, pregnant with the weight of everything unspoken, everything I couldn't put into words. I am consumed by it, lost in the spaces between sound. The final note strikes, the release, both a relief and a sorrow. The symphony does not leave me. It remains simmering in my veins, echoing in my chest. Even in the quiet, the music lives on, a ghost haunting the room, tethered to my soul. The orchestra finishes. No ovation, no cries of bravo, no acknowledgement of the pleasure they delivered. The musicians shuffle from the stage, back into the darkness. For a few moments, I do not move from my seat as I ingest the melodies. Around me, the others assembled drift off to whatever life they now suffer, and I am left in the auditorium alone. Inhaling deeply, I feel as though my very spirit has just received nourishment. I need this just as much as I need the feel of Anton's warm cloak around me. Finally, I grab my cane and use it to stand, the ache returning to my legs. Making my way from the theatre, I return to the clear, cold night. It is late now, and I feel tired, but the music still reverberates around my mind as I make my way back through the streets. Nobody is around at this hour, and the moon has sunk below the horizon, leaving the twinkling stars above me. Reaching the stone lions, barely visible, I enter the park, the sound of my cane on stone loud in my ears. I pick my way through the vines, careful not to snag my foot and trip, using the cane to navigate around the darker shadows. Yet again, I feel as though I am being watched, and I pause to listen. I turn to face each direction, but it is too dark here to see anything clearly. I increase my pace, heading for the exit as quickly as I could manage. Ahead, I see the bandstand silhouetted, its thorny barbs amplified against the starry night. My limp seems worse as I attempt to flee, now sure that I am being followed. My unseen pursuer's footsteps mirroring my own. My breath is a mist, with my heart beating its own percussive staccato. I see the exit now, just up ahead, nearly home. Then he appears, the man in rags. His eyes contain a madness. I try to defend myself as I lift my cane in his direction, but he is too quick. I fall to the ground, feeling winded. The cane clatters next to me. My breath comes in gasps, and my hands feel the wetness emerging from my abdomen. The assailant is upon me, roughly dragging off the cloak. It doesn't take him long. He flees into the night with his prize, a cloak to keep him warm in this cold blackness. I am left on the ground as I feel the rhythm of my heartbeat slow. I feel no pain, but a creeping coldness, ice spreading through my veins. I stare up into the night sky, up into the eternal. I see the stars that shine in the vast universe. Our lives miss specks of time to their own, and yet, even as my life reaches its own crescendo, a calmness descends upon me. In the briefest lifetime of unspeakable acts done to humanity, a truth reveals itself, a redemption. I know that we possess a beauty of our own, an inner beauty, an antidote to the horror. The stars fade, and as I perceive the face of Anton smiling down upon me, I know there will be no encore. "We literally have bats in the belfry," said Hannah, my wife, as she lay in her sickbed. She began to laugh, but this descended into a fit of coughs. A line of blood streamed from her mouth to her chin. I wiped it off gently with the damp flannel I held in my latex-gloved hand. "We do indeed," I confirmed, speaking through my fabric face mask. Hannah had wondered about the fluttering noises emerging from the tower. "Pipistrelle bats, I believe," I said, in a kindly voice. We called this derelict monastery home after fleeing the city. Deep in the woods, it served as a perfect place to isolate ourselves from the terror encompassing the world. The monastery sat derelict, unused for decades, but still retained some serviceable rooms fit for just the two of us, despite smashed windows and crumbling masonry. We fled here in my car a week ago, escaping the pandemic, the return of humanity's old enemy, Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague, the Black Death. We thought we had beaten it. We felt the disease had been confined to the history books. We were wrong. A new strain, resistant to antibiotics, emerged. Some nations blamed others, claiming that this new infection escaped from a laboratory. The finger-pointing did not help when the buboes appeared and the deaths began. 3 years ago, I'd been a doctor in Africa, treating Ebola and Mpox outbreaks, but this worldwide sickness spread on an altogether different scale. As a doctor, I had been at the forefront as people became ill. Once we realized that antibiotic treatment was no longer effective, panic spread. As soon as the dark lumps appeared on people's armpits, necks and groins, they sought me out, begging for help. This strain attacked and spread in a far more aggressive fashion. Without any recognizable treatment, death was certain. No cases of anyone surviving infection existed. We may have won many battles against the bacteria, but the plague was set to win the war. Being on the front line, put Hannah and myself in danger, being at risk of constant transmission. Once we realized we could do nothing, we fled, sharing this fallen monastery in the woods with the bats. We told nobody, afraid that the desperate would still try and locate us, even though I could provide no treatment. I brought some basic medical supplies, along with food and water to last us months. We would lie low for as long as we could, while the disease spread and wiped out all the infected. Wait for it to abate, then return to whatever world remained after this mass extinction. I knew this was the only possible path to survival. But after just a few days here, Hannah's skin began to show dark patches, which then turned into lumps. She got sick and then bedridden. It was too late for her. All I could do was try and make her final hours as comfortable as possible. As so unused to seeing advancing disease and death, I still found it hard to accept in the one person dearest to me. As the last few days went by, I sat with her. I administered what little morphine I'd brought with me and sat by her side as she slipped in and out of consciousness. In her lucid moments, we spoke about our past, the day we met at the pier at the seaside, our Greek island wedding, along with the laughter and the tears of a life spent together. When she died, in the early hours before dawn, the only sound I could hear was the fluttering of the bats in the brick tower. I'm not ashamed to say that I shed many tears for the loss of my beloved Hannah, and also for the cruelty of a world brought down by an invisible killer. I covered her frame with a white sheet. Still overcome by grief, I departed through the shabby wooden doors that sat below the bell tower. I went into the surrounding woods. Spending hours gathering sticks and branches, I piled them high in front of the monastery until I built a bed of wood for me to lay her upon. Wearing my protective scrubs, her body felt light and fragile as I lifted her onto the bower, the disease having ravaged her frame. Siphoning a little fuel from my SUV, I poured it onto the pyre. The afternoon turned into evening by the time I started the fire. Still covered by the white sheet, I sat and watched as the flames grew, all-consuming, killing the bacteria and sending Hannah's ashes up into the night sky. I sat for hours as the night passed, my face warmed by the heat. I sat in the knowledge that countless other fires were igniting across the globe for the same reason. As I watched, I saw the bats swoop and circle through the red glare, feasting on the moths and other flying insects attracted to the glow. At some point, exhaustion and sorrow overtook me, and I fell asleep. A cold, misty dawn broke when I stirred from slumber. The pyre still smoked, the child once strong in my nostrils. A few shafts of sunlight filtered through the leaves of the wood, and I retreated back into the monastery to warm myself next to the hearth I had cleared and built. My mind too full of grief to contemplate my own future, I gathered my sleeping bag around me. I must have spent all day in slumber, because all around was dark when I awoke. The coldness had vanished. I felt warm despite the hearth bowing down. When I realized I was sweating, I went over to the mirror near my camp bed and removed my shirt. I saw a large black stain spread over my skin between my armpit and my neck. There it was. I'd also caught the plague. My own days were now numbered. A strange calmness followed my initial shock. What had I to live for, anyway? Now Hannah had gone, along with the rest of the world. Only one decision remained on my mind. How did I want to leave my life? Having seen the effects of the disease, the pain, vomiting, the weeping souls, I knew that I did not want to die that way. Checking on my remaining morphine, I had enough for a single, pain-killing dose, but not enough to euthanize myself. I also had a scalpel in my medical bag, but the thought of watching my blood spilling out of me as I faded filled me with dread. As I contemplated my remaining mortality, the sound of the bats fluttering in the tower reached me. I could climb up there, up the ladder, to the roof. It sat high above the surrounding treetops. A fall would certainly be fatal. Close my eyes, a rush of air, and it would all be over. How could I contemplate suicide? By my bed stood a photograph of Hannah and I on our wedding day, smiling on a beach next to a crystal clear sea. I picked it up, and my tears welled up once again. My years of medical practice taught me that life is precious, that we should cling on to it, no matter the cost, for as long as possible. Where there is life, there is hope. As I looked at that photo, my hope departed, and despair took me. With a sudden action, I stood galvanized. I ignored the voice inside my head that counseled caution, and I strode over to the door at the tower. Inside, I climbed the wooden staircase that wrapped around the square construction, taking them two at a time. My breath came in gasps. All the time, my brain insisting that I wait, that I think about this some more. For my despair overrode my lifelong devotion to the preservation of life. At the top of the staircase sat a landing area, covered in bat droppings. A wooden ladder extended to the roof. Here, gaps in the masonry appeared, and hung from the rafters, the Pipistrelle bats found their roost, their feet gripping onto the rotten mud. At this time of the evening, they arrived and departed through the holes in the wall. Ignoring them, I made for the hatch, climbing the ladder a rung at a time. My thighs and biceps felt heavy, an ache brought by the bacteria invading every cell of my body, as I gritted my teeth and forced myself upwards. As I neared the hatch, I reached up and grabbed the next rung. As I did so, I felt a tickle on my fingers. A bat had found a roost here, and I grabbed his foot. I heard a squeak, and then a brief flutter as the bat escaped my clutches, immediately followed by a sound of 1,000 umbrellas being opened. The swarm struck me. Defending their roost, they spun around me, still clinging to the ladder. They squeaked and scratched. I could see nothing but their leathery wing flaps and mouse-like bodies. I fell and took several breaths before I struck the landing. Everything went black. When I awoke, my first thought was the pain at the back of my head. My vision returned, swirling in front of my eyes. When I tried to move, several bats squeaked and flew off me. Sitting up, I checked the back of my head and felt a large lump. I then noticed that I was covered in patches of blood where the bats had scratched and burned me. I took a few deep breaths. Looking up, the flying mammals still circled, but had stopped attacking. I tried to get to my feet, but a pain shot up my calf from my ankle. It was either sprained or broken. In any case, I had no chance of climbing to the roof. Cursing my misfortune, I lid-backed to the stairs and descended back down them. Dizziness and pain mingled as I reached the ground floor, but I managed to make it to my camp bed before I collapsed, unconscious. I cannot recall how long I slept. Maybe it was a day or maybe two, but when I awoke I felt thirsty. My head throbbed so much I felt nauseous. Soreness came from all over my body, and in the moonlight that filtered through the windows, I saw dried blood covering my clothing from my pierced skin. In addition to all this, I could not stand on my right leg, and my ankle had swollen to twice the size. I took a bottle of water I kept beside my bed. My hands shook as I raised it to my lips, and as the water entered my mouth, my throat seemed to gag and spasm as I swallowed what felt like razor blades. I switched on the battery-powered lamp. I was a mess. I leaned on my left leg as I stood, balancing my hand on the bed frame for support. The mirror lay ahead. A pale face and sunken eyes looked back at me. Wondering how long I had left, I took off my shirt. Although covered in bites and scratches, I saw no purple-black bruise, no inflamed pustules or buboes erupting at my skin. What was this? I still felt gravely ill, but the signs of the infection had vanished. I quickly checked over the rest of my body. Nothing. No outward sign of plague. My experience taught me that some diseases could regress a little before returning, although this seemed unlikely given the aggressiveness of this strain. I had not seen this in anyone I had treated thus far. No, some other explanation must exist. As I considered what could be happening, I treated the areas of broken skin with iodine. Sat back on my bed, I wiped them with cotton wool and the disinfectant. My hands shook as I did so. My headache worsened to the point I could barely see, and I was running a temperature. I wondered whether I had contracted sepsis. My shakes worsened, and I attempted to reach for my water bottle once again. This time, I could not even get it to my lips, and I dropped it to the floor, the water spilling over the cold stone. Shivering uncontrollably, I managed to bed back down again, pulling the blanket over me. The night passed fitfully. I opened my eyes to a noise, a fluttering. It was the bats. They surrounded the monastery. Not just a few this time, but an army. I let out a scream as I saw a figure in the darkness beyond my lamp. I could not see his expression, just his brown robes. The hood hung low down over his face. He stood, arms folded in his sleeves, just out of view in the darkness. In the shadows beyond, he was joined by others, assembling to look at me. I heard a mysterious, dark chanting emanating from these terrifying monks. And all the time, the squeaking of the bats surrounding the place intensified. The monks turned their backs to me, looking at the doors that opened out to the woods beyond. They approached them, and I realized their intention. The bats outside were seeking entry, and the monks would give it. I tried to shout for warning, but just a low moan came from my parched lips. The doors swung open. A mist lay beyond, and I wondered where the bats had gone. But then they came. They burst through the opening, en masse, filling the spaces around me. They consumed the monks in a whirling tornado. The windows smashed, shards of glass exploding all around, and more bats streamed in. Like a cloud caught in a gale, they swarmed towards me. I saw their red eyes and glistening fangs. Their wings tipped with sharp talons. They meant to have me. I lifted the blanket as protection, and once again, blackness overtook me. A shuddering breath, and then a bright light. I awoke to the morning of the world. Lifting the blanket off my head, I peeled myself in the mattress where my sweat and blood had dried. My ankle throbbed, my head was painful to the touch, and my wounds itched as they healed. The water bottle lay on the floor where I had dropped it, and I picked it up. A few drops remained, and I drank in a single refreshing gulp. I managed to stand, and I grabbed another bottle and downed it in one. Hobbling over to a wooden bench, I sat and pondered what had occurred. I could not guess how many days I'd been lying on that bed, unconscious. The doors were closed, the windows intact. I'd been hallucinating. My breathing came easier, and my energy levels returned, as did my reasoning. Despite everything, I smiled as my thoughts turned to my own diagnosis. I had caught the plague, that was for sure, but then the bats intervened. They had bitten and scratched me. 3 years ago, I had been in Africa, treating illnesses. Before I went, I myself had received vaccinations against certain diseases. One of these was rabies. A few minutes later, I sat in my car and made ready to return to civilization. I'd used a branch to support my weight, bandaged my wounds, and injected myself with the final dosage of morphine against the pain. I had news. Rabies, that fatal, deadly virus, was also deadly to the bacteria Yersinia pestis. Rabies was a phage. I had experienced rabies, but the vaccination, that should have only protected for a few months, must have lain dormant in me. As the disease progressed, a few antibodies remaining in my system activated and fought it off. I wasn't sure if much of the world remained. But I now knew that my blood contained antibodies. The fight against infection returned. We had an answer. One deadly disease would kill another. A lump in my throat formed as I contemplated what may have been. I should not have given up despair. Hope exists where life lingers. Answers often come from an unlikely source. As I started the car, I looked up at the tower and saw the Pipistrelles circling. The air hangs thick with the smell of rot and decay as I trudge through the barren wasteland. My backpack rattles behind me, weighed down by the scrap and junk I've scavenged. Pots and pans, cutlery, tins, gears. In this world, anything can be bartered. The ruin of the planet cost us everything. Food is the most precious commodity, and that's what I'm after. Ahead, this remote village squats on the horizon, small and miserable. I see the remains of cottages, sagging and bent under the weight of years of neglect. As I draw closer, the villagers gather, eyes glinting with suspicion. They are not much more than ghosts, these people. Ragged clothes, hollow eyes, skin stretched taut over their bones. But they have tilled fields and chicken coops, and have food to trade. A woman approaches me, basket in hand, her face wrinkled and weathered. She trades me a bundle of root vegetables and eggs, enough to last me a week if I'm careful. In exchange, she takes out a large iron pot I'd hung on my backpack. As I turn to leave, she sees fit to warn me about the forest that lies beyond the next ridgeline. Do not enter Woad Wood, she says. The witch lives there. Nobody ever returns. I grunt, not dignifying the warning with a reply, and take to the path leading me away. Witches. In this world, it's not witches you have to fear, but men. As this thought crosses my mind, I glance at a group of hunters and farmers loitering by the edge of the village, pitchforks and sickles clutched in their hands. Their eyes follow me, dark, suspicious. My tired legs ache as I make my way out of the village, the sun already beginning its slow descent. Shadows stretch long across the cracked earth, and I pick up my pace. Something about the way those men stared at me, the gleam in their eyes, sits wrong. The warning about the witch has unsettled me, and I ponder my fear. Cannibalism is rife in the wasteland, and I wonder if this person is an example. Up ahead, I see the line of dark trees that mark the edge of Woad Wood. It is getting late. The air turns colder as twilight creeps in, and I start to consider making camp. And then I hear it, the rush of footsteps behind me. I spin, barely catching the flash of movement before they're on me. A blow catches me across the jaw, and I stagger, arms flailing to grab anything. Take him, someone growls, and the group of men from the village swarm about me as wolves around prey. I swing wildly, but it's useless. A boot connects with my ribs, pain flares, and the world spins. I drop to the ground, and they tear off my backpack, ripping away the few meagre supplies I managed to collect. Before I can process the chaos, something hard slams into the side of my skull, and everything goes black. I drift in and out of awareness, floating between pain and darkness. I feel my heels drag against the rough ground, scraping over twigs and stones, My limbs heavy, useless. The smell of damp earth fills my nose. I try to open my eyes, but the weight and unconsciousness pulls me under again. I wake to the taste of blood and the sound of my own ragged breathing. My wrists burn, bound tight to the edge of the marrow bed, the ropes biting into my skin. My whole body throbs with the pain of my wounds. The room around me is dark, lit only by a flickering candle on a wooden table. A peculiar smell hangs in the air, sweetness and decay mingling. Dead animals, chickens, rabbits, birds, are strung up from the rafters, their limp bodies swaying gently. Clumps of herbs and weeds lie scattered on every surface. Somewhere in the darkness, I can hear the bubbling of a large pot. Panic grips me, and I thrash, trying to free myself. The pain surges through my body, sharp and burning, but the ropes hold. My heart pounds in my chest, each beat thudding louder than the last. I have been caught by the witch. Perhaps that pot is meant for me. I wriggle my arms, twisting, pulling, teeth gritted against the pain, until, finally, the rope gives. My hands are free. I push myself up, vision swimming, and stumble towards the door. The floor shifts under my feet, the walls closing in, but I lurch forward, desperate. I burst through an oak door, and outside, air hits me like a slap, cold and biting. Falling into the dark garden, I turn to see the house, crouching in the centre of a twisted grove within Woad Wood, vines choking the light from the trees. Rows of plants, herbs maybe, stretch out in crooked lines, their leaves drooping, blackened. The trees loom over the house, their dead branches reaching towards the sky, claws grasping at nothing. The air reeks of decay. I collapse through the bush, pushing past thorny brambles, tugging at my skin, but my foot catches. A vine, thick and knotted. I trip, crashing to the ground. Pain explodes in my head, and once again, the world blurs, spins. Limbs heavy, I try to crawl, but my body betrays me. I fall to the ground, sweat bursting on my forehead, utterly exhausted. A shadow looms over me, dragging something behind it. The figure bends down, black against the night, hands rough as they lift me onto a makeshift stretcher. I try to fight, to move, but my body refuses. Pain, exhaustion, everything weighs me down. She drags me inside, back to the room, back to the bed. I'm too weak to resist as she forces something to my lips, a bitter drink. I gag, trying to spit it out, but her hands are firm, relentless. She pinches my nose and pushes my jaw shut. The liquid burns as it slides down my throat, and I choke, my vision blurring once more. When I wake again, daylight filters through cracks in the shuttered windows. My wrists are still tied, and my body thrums with constant pain. I turn my head, and she stands over me. A woman bent with age, her back hunched, her face twisted, one side drooping like melted wax. She watches me with dark, glinting eyes, her twisted mouth pulling at the corners. Her dress, black as night, clings to her frame. She moves with a limp, dragging one foot as she shuffles around the room. Her silence is unnerving, worse than any words she might speak. But then she laughs, a sharp, sharp cackle. It echoes in the small space, sharp as a knife. I swallow hard, my throat dry. What do you want from me? She says nothing, only grins that awful crooked grin. Then she moves to a wooden cage, pulls out a live rabbit, and snaps its spine in one swift motion. I flinch, watching as she hangs the rabbit by its feet. From her belt, she removes a small knife, and then proceeds to slice the throat of the dead rabbit. The blood drips into a pot, thick and dark, pooling at the bottom. She plucks a feather from a dead crow hanging from the rafters. She tests the tip of the feather with her finger before grabbing the pot of blood and approaching me. From the drawers by the side of the bed, she produces a blank sheet of parchment. Using the feather as a quill, she dips it into the blood. Her hand moves over the parchment, her nib scratching against the surface as she writes. Slowly, she turns the parchment towards me. I want to help you. Her words hang, written in blood, the spidery letters glistening wet on the parchment. Help me. My pulse pounds in my ears, drowning out the faint creaks of the house settling around us. Every instinct screams to run, but the ropes bite into my wrists. I shift, wincing at the sharp sting from the cuts and bruises I've sustained. She watches me, still as stone, the feather dripping in her hand. The stench of dead meat clogs the air, mingling with the pungent odour of herbs hanging from the ceiling. Everything about this place feels twisted. She gestures again to the paper, as if impatient for me to understand. Why? I choke out the words, my throat raw. Why am I tied up? Her eyes narrow, but she doesn't speak. Instead, her claw-like fingers trace the letters on the parchment, and she scrawls another message with agonizing slowness. So you don't scratch your wounds. A shiver runs down my spine. Her reasoning is practical. She turns her back on me, her hunched figure bending awkwardly as she collects dried herbs from a shelf, crushing them between her fingers into a small bowl. The rhythmic grinding fills the silence, broken only by her occasional raspy breaths. Who are you? I ask, though my voice trembles. What is this place? She ignores me, but I catch a flicker in her eyes, something old, worn. Instead of answering, she grabs a jar of cloudy liquid from a table, pours it over the herbs and stirs. I grit my teeth, pulling against the ropes, trying to break free, but my arms are weak, my strength drained by infection and days of pain. The witch shuffles towards me, limping heavily. Her misshapen figure casts a long shadow over the bed, the dim light warping her features further. She holds out the bowl, offering it to me. The liquid inside is a deep green, swirling thickly, bits of crushed leaves floating on the surface. I eye it, stomach twisting. What is that? She presses the bowl to my lips, her hands firm, insistent. Panic rises in my chest, and I clap my mouth shut, shaking my head, but she's relentless. Her fingers grip my jaw, forcing it open with surprising strength, and the bitter mixture spills into my mouth. I gag, struggling to spit it out, but her hand clutches over my mouth, again forcing me to swallow. The taste is foul, burning as it slides down my throat. For a second, I think I'll vomit, but the sensation passes. My limbs grow heavier, the pain in my side dulling to a distant throb. My mind clouds over, thoughts drifting. She watches as my body succumbs to whatever potion she's forced down my throat, her eyes glittering like dark stones. As my vision begins to blur, her crooked smile stretches wider, her cackle, high, sharp, echoing in my skull, and so I slip into the black void once more. When I wake, it's quieter. The ache in my body has dulled, but it's still there, gnawing at the edges of my awareness. She's sitting in the corner, stirring something in a pot over a small fire, her movements slow and deliberate. I flex my fingers, testing the ropes. They're gone. My wrists are bruised, raw, but free. I sit up slowly, the world tilting slightly as I swing my legs over the side of the bed. My wounds are bandaged, crudely but effectively. The infection hasn't spread further, but skin around the bandaging is swollen, angry red. She doesn't notice me at first, or pretends not to, but I can see her crooked spine bent over her work. I stare at her, really taking her in for the first time. Her black dress hangs loosely over her thin frame, and the half of her face that isn't frozen in that permanent droop is tired. The skin around her eyes is lined with age, and her hair, though mostly covered by a scarf, spills out in greasy strands. A once beautiful face, ravaged by time, something else. A wave of clarity strikes me as I look upon her. a realization that my befuddled mind and injured body refused to acknowledge. I'd succumbed to the superstitions of the village. This old lady must have suffered a stroke that robbed her of her speech and caused the physical abnormalities. She turns towards me, catching my gaze, the air between us thick. "What do you want?" I ask again, my voice stronger now, but the fear still simmers beneath the surface. "Why did you help me?" She reaches for another sheet of parchment from the drawer, her gnarled fingers trembling slightly as she dips the quill into the rabbit's blood again. I watch as she writes, slowly and methodically, the scratching sound of the quill filling the room. "I want to live in peace. They want to destroy me." The words chill me. The villagers, the ones who warned me, the ones who attacked me. I glance at her again, her hunched figure and crooked smile. She isn't what they think she is. Not a witch, not exactly. She holds up another sheet of parchment, and this time words are simpler. "Will you help me?" I hesitate, my mind racing. She saved me, kept me alive when the infection would have killed me. But nothing in this world is without cost, a price to be paid. I glance around the room at the dangling carcasses, the dried herbs, the strange relics of a life isolated from the world. Her cackle bursts from her lips again like a crone's call. She dips the quill into the blood, and with a slow, deliberate stroke, writes again, "Help me with the villagers." I stare at the words, my breath catching in my throat. She's asking for protection. From them. From the same people who want her gone, the ones who fear her. She looks up at me, her crooked smile gone, replaced by something quieter, more vulnerable, a plea. I sit up straighter, eyes narrowing. "You want me to talk to them? They tried to kill me." She doesn't move, doesn't blink, but the corners of her mouth twitch just slightly. She dips the quill into the blood again, her hand trembling as she writes, "I just want them to leave me alone." She rises from her seat, her hunched form casting long, distorted shadows against the flickering firelight. Her twisted hand grips the bowl of herbs and liquid, and she brings it over, setting it on a low table beside me. "You fed me that." "Not me out. You could have killed me any time. Why didn't you?" She tilts her head, watching me closely. Her one good eye glints, a mix of pity and something darker, like triumph. She grabs another sheet of parchment, and I watch as she writes, "Because I need you alive. The villagers will return. They always do." I shake my head. "They think you're a witch. They'll burn you alive if they get the chance." "They've tried before." The words send a shiver through me. This woman has survived alone all this time. The distrust and superstition of the village threatens her existence. She just wants to live in peace with the remnants of nature that are trying so desperately to re-establish themselves. But now she is infirm. She can no longer fight for herself. She needs my help. As I consider her words, she leaves the room for a moment before returning with a book. I feel the leather-bound cover as she hands it to me, and when I open the pages, yellowed photographs stare back. It does not take me long to see that they are pictures of her in her youth, before this rotted world came to pass. In some photographs, she is dressed in a immerses uniform. In others, she is smiling as she is tending to her garden, holding up potted plants and carrying chickens under her arm. I run a hand through my filthy hair, the exhaustion from days of pain and fever crashing into me all at once. "What's your plan?" I ask. "How do you expect me to stop them? They already tried to kill me." "They need to fear coming to this place," she writes. Turning to a tall cabinet, its doors creaking as she pulls them open. Inside, rows of glass jars gleam, filled with thick black liquid. She motions to one jar, swirling the contents slowly. She uncorks the lid, and the liquid bubbles from froths, releasing a sickly sweet scent that burns my throat. I stare at the jars. "You want me to, what? Poison them? Her hunched shoulders rise and fall in a shrug, and she writes again. If they attack, we defend. This will make them sick. I close my eyes, running my hand over the rough bandages on my side. The infection still lingers under the surface, but the pain has dulled. I should be dead. She saved me. But at what cost? The villagers, the ones who warned me to stay away, the ones who robbed me, intend to pay her a visit too. Their fear and superstition enough to bring them to violence. And when they do, I'll have to choose. I nod and ring to help her, and she cackles loudly, rubbing her hands together. The next few days pass in a blow. My strength returns, slowly, thanks to her concoctions and the rabbit meat she feeds me, obtained from the small game traps she has placed around the wood. The house becomes a little less foreign as I watch her work. It's not the den of horrors I'd imagined, just a home. A strange, twisted home, full of drying herbs and hanging carcasses, but it's functional, efficient. Her rituals aren't magic, they're just ways of survival. She never speaks, of course, but her cackle still haunts the air at night, a reminder of the strangeness lurking in every shadow. I catch glimpses of her past, photographs tucked away in battered albums. She's younger in them, standing in gardens, smiles on her face, no crooked spine, no dripping eye. A healer, not a witch. On the 5th night, they come. The first hint of danger is the sound of crackling fire. It creeps in on the wind, faint but unmistakable. I step to the window, pulling aside the filthy curtain, and I see the torches bobbing through the trees, their flames flickering like willow wisps in the dusk. They're here, I whisper. We are prepared. Behind me, she's already moving, limping towards the cabinet. The air thickens with anticipation, her fingers moving with practiced calm as she hands me one of the jars, the black, fake liquid sloshing inside. I'll need to move quickly or they'll burn the house down, I say, staring at the approaching lights. Quickly, I leave through a window on the back of the house to not alert the intruders. In my pocket, I have darts, whittled down from dead wood, and in my right hand, a blowpipe. The left holds the poison. I climb the husk of the dead tree next to the house as quietly as possible. I see the group of men approaching, the torches light in their faces. It was the same group that attacked me, about 10 of them. They must see themselves as the village militia, here to destroy what they see as an abomination, and no doubt steal whatever valuables she may possess. In addition to their burning lights, they carry pitchforks and scythes. They have not noticed me in the trees. They do not expect any resistance from this old hag. I dip a dart in the poison and place it into the pipe as they approach. Taking aim at the nearest one, as he walks below my position, I puff my cheeks and blow. A quick hand to his neck indicates my dart has hit, and I quickly reload with another. For a moment my target looks confused. He stops in his tracks and looks around as though he does not know where he is. Then he begins to wave his arm about, warding off invisible phantoms. This concoction was causing hallucinations. He cries and screams, writhing this way and that, swinging his arms about as madness engulfs. As he does so, I strike another man, reload, and then another. As insanity engulfs them, the rest of the party start to wonder what is going on. They hesitate, but not for long. They surge forward, a swarm of bodies and makeshift weapons. The 3 I have hit scream in terror at unseen horrors, but the rest of them make for the front of the house. The door is flung open, and she stands before them. The witch, cackling loudly, she holds a packet in her hand, a pouch full of herbs and flowers, and in the other a candle. She puts the flame to the packet and throws it at the assailants. It explodes in front of them, lighting up the wood in a flash of flame. Fire of every colour, blue, green and red. They recoil, and I hit another with my poisoned dart. Those affected start to attack the other members of the group, believing them to be monsters or demons. They slash at them with their sides and poke them with their pitchforks, crazed looks in their eyes. Caught between fire and madness, they retreat, fighting amongst themselves, trying to fathom what devilish magic has overcome them. They flee, and I listen to their screams as I watch their firelight fade into the woods. As the silence returns, I hear her cackle as I climb down the tree. We return into the house. Collapsing into a chair, the candlelight playing on my face, I consider my future. She has food and warmth. Her potions can heal. But she also has poisons to defend against the harsh survivors of this forgotten world. But she is aging and needs protecting against those who seek to do her harm. The villagers have fled and will no doubt tell of tales of her calling down the devil to possess them and drive them away. But they may be back one day. As I rest, a thought strikes me. Maybe she has cast a spell on me. Maybe I am now her thrall. But be that as it may, I have found my home. My wandering days are over. Henry hobbled over to his bed, his walking frame thudding on the carpeted floor. Dressed in his pajamas and dressing gown, these days he rarely wore anything else. He eased himself down onto his bed as gently as he could. Nevertheless, his knees cracked and his aching spine hunched. He was no more than a skeleton, but everything within him felt heavy and compacted. Wearisome life a daily challenge, he found the festive period especially challenging. He lived in a single room. Everything he needed was within the limited distance he could move around. His tiny kitchen with the old stove next to his sink, and a lounge area that doubled as his bedroom. He now spent his days resting on his bed, watching his television, or listening to his old transistor radio. Despite this, he still managed to put up his tiny Christmas tree in the far corner, and he watched the lights glow for a moment in the dark room. At the rear stood a glass door that led to a small garden, no more than a patch of grass surrounded by trees. It was accessible to him, and he often enjoyed sitting on the wooden chair where he fed the sparrows. On a branch hung a small bird feeder he kept topped up with peanuts, and in the centre of the lawn stood a stone bird bath. A simple pleasure remained in his life as he watched the tiny creatures as they flitted around. Christmas Eve arrived cold, the gentle snowfall covering all with a layer of pure white. The bird bath stood with its frozen surface of ice. Henry liked to keep the curtain open to look past the end of his bed, through the glass door and into his garden beyond. Other than his daily carers who arrived each morning to feed him and help him around his room, he lived alone. He had done for almost a decade now. But each night, as he climbed into his bed, he took up the frame that sat on his nightstand and kissed his wedding photograph. The black and white image faded over time, had a worn spot just over the face of his wife, May, from where he kissed her each evening. She had loved the birds more than Henry. May sat for hours in their garden, standing before the canvas, easel in hand, and painted them. Even now, the small pictures lined his walls. Her favourite were the robins, and especially so at this time of year. There are orange and white breasts and dainty legs and beaks, childlike in her eyes. Henry never got used to this loneliness. He missed her every hour of every day. she was never far from his thoughts. And as he kissed her photograph, he wished her a happy Christmas and placed the frame down gently. Next to the photograph lay a small glass of brandy that he indulged given the season, and he winced as he brought it to his lips and felt it burn as it slipped down. But the warming liquid made him feel a little better, and he flicked on his radio to listen to the choirs singing their hymns at midnight mass. He had to lift each leg onto the bed to settle down, but once he had, he pulled over his blanket and turned off the lamp. Listening to the sounds of singing, he also heard his own breath rattling in his lungs and his eyes getting heavy. The lights from his tree danced around the room, and he could see the snow piled high on top of the bird bath through the door. Eventually, his eyelids closed and he drifted off. He woke to the sound of tapping. Opening his eyes, he thought at first it came from this radio that he had left on. Static came through its speakers, and he clicked it off before settling back down again. The tapping continued. Using his pillow as a support, he sat up and rubbed his eyes. The tree lights still danced, but outside the moon shone brightly, illuminating the snowy garden so that the whole room glowed in a silvery light. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the door. Sitting up further, Henry perceived a tiny creature outside the glass. A robin. It flicked its head around, fixing Henry with a stare from the black dot of its eye. Smiling, Henry watched this curious bird for a moment. Soon enough, it began to tap its beak on the door once again. "What do you want, little robin?" asked Henry. The bird tapped again. "Are you hungry? I might have some peanuts for you in here." As he spoke, he knew what an effort it would be for him to get up and make his way to the door. And yet something within him wanted to do this more than anything. A little Christmas gift for this nocturnal visitor. With an effort, he swung his legs from the bed, put his feet in his warm slippers, and reached for his walking frame. Using it, he stood, the blanket falling away from him, and he took a moment to catch a breath. Shortly after, he made his way towards the door. Near to the door, he opened a drawer where he kept the packet of peanuts for the birds, and he grabbed a handful. As he moved, he felt invigorated, and something else washed over him. Calmness, serenity. It travelled through him, and the heaviness that invaded his body seemed to vanish. He left the walking frame, but still needed to steady himself as he walked towards the door, using his hand on the furniture. The door handle felt cold to the touch, but the robin still stood on the patio beyond, looking at Henry with curiosity. Twisting the handle, he felt the cold night air on his face, and it was refreshing, as though the snow and ice cleaned the very atmosphere. The robin hopped backwards a couple of steps as the door opened, but as Henry came outside, it raised its wings and flew over to the bird bath. "Where are you going, little robin?" asked Henry. "I have a little snack for you for Christmas night." The robin bobbed its head at him from the bird bath, raising its wings and flitting them about but not flying away. Henry opened his hand, showing the peanuts to the robin. It looked at them for a moment, hesitating, as though unsure of his motives. Then, quick as a flash, it flew over and landed on his fingers. Henry felt his heart could explode as the tiny bird sat on his hand, head switching backwards and forwards, looking at him with bead-like eyes. Then he grabbed a nut in its beak and flew off towards the rear of the garden and into the trees. Henry laughed with delight. It had been a long time since he had laughed, but now he felt the simple joy of nature in his heart. A beautiful evening. He stood for a moment, looking at the trees where the robin flew. He could still see it, Peanut sitting in its beak, standing on a branch. Henry took a few steps into the garden, the snow sticking to his slippers, the strength returning to his invigorated limbs. Keeping sight of the bird, He moved past the birdbath towards the line of trees. Then, suddenly, the robin vanished into the undergrowth. Sighing, Henry wished the bird could have stayed longer, and he looked into the trees to see if he could spot it. Instead, he saw the silhouette of a figure. "Hello, who's that?" he asked, wondering why someone would be in his garden so late. No reply. Henry moved closer, resting his hand on the wooden trunk of the tree the robin just vacated. "Who's there?" he asked. The silhouette inside began to approach him. He watched as the figure materialized from the surrounding darkness, seeming to float rather than walk, becoming more distinct. Henry caught his breath. May appeared from the trees. No longer the old lady he had stayed with as she died, but young again. He recognized her long white dress made of lace. She had worn this on the night they'd met, Christmas Eve, at a dance. Henry backed away, afraid of what this meant, taking steps back into his garden, his feet sinking into the snow. She emerged from the trees, her face white but smiling. That beautiful smile. Oh, was all Henry could manage. She held out her hand to him, and without hesitation, he moved towards her and took it. When their hands met, he felt an energy surge through him. All his aches vanished, the strength returned to his bones, and the cold night became warm. The stars twinkled brightly, and the snow around shone in crystalline brilliance. Looking down at his own body, he saw he was dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and bow tie. The same he had worn that evening, all those years ago, the night he met May, at a dance on Christmas Eve. May held his hand down by his waist, and the other she placed on his shoulder as he drew her closer. Embracing, he placed his head next to hers, feeling the softness of her hair against his cheek. They began to dance. Around the garden they went, waltzing around the birdbath, the gentle rise and fall of two souls entwined. All the cold vanished, all the pain of life extinguished, the pleasure of the dance total. Lifting up May's hand above her head, her smile broadened as she spun below, and he took her into hold once again as they continued. With foxtrot steps, they caroused in the snow, moving together as one, until the crescendo of the dance, as she pulled away from him momentarily before rushing back into his arms yet again. Rotating with small steps, they moved closer, and he kissed her as he did for the first time on a cold Christmas Eve. The dance ended, and she held his hand in hers. She fixed her gaze upon him and began to lead him back into the trees. He followed her without question and without remorse. They were together once again, and forever young. Christmas morning arrived, clean and fresh, and the robin emerged from the trees. Flying over the birdbath, it took up its spot once again outside the glass door. Peering inside, two people, a man and a woman, stood over the bed, wearing latex gloves and green scrubs. The woman looked at the man, sadness etched on her face, and shook her head. The man lifted the blanket and covered the body that lay in the bed. The robin tapped the door, and they both looked over. The woman approached the door and opened it, watching the robin as it flew back into the trees. Perching on a branch, it was joined by another, bobbing its head and flitting its wings. She smiled at them both. I watch from the promontory as we gather at this most important time of year for us. It is October 31st, and twilight is upon us. The sun is sinking below the waves, and the moon prepares to shed its cold light. The folk approach. The men are dressed, as I am, in long frock-coated suits, black as night, with scarlet cravats. The ladies in long, dark dresses made of satin and lace. Many also cover their faces with black netted veils. All of us have powdered our skin veil, wear heavy mascara around our eyes, and painted blood-red lips. Tonight is a celebration. We gather here, on this island in the middle of the Irish Sea, as we have done for centuries, as we have done since the time before religion, before the adoption of their ways and practices. We gather for our celebration of Samhain. Although this term may be less known amongst the world, most of the planet still celebrate it as we do. They have adopted the more popular term, derived from the church, as the Eve of the Hallows, Halloween. We, of course, are the ones who maintain its founding principles, a celebration of death and darkness. This place of stone here on the headland offers a clear view of the rising moon as it reflects upon the water. I greet the convocation with a smile and the silent nod, which they return, before they enter through the pointed archway behind me. On a table just through the doorway lie baked shortbread, soul cakes, marked with a cross over the top. Next to this sits a large decanter of red wine and a host of silver goblets. The assembled help themselves before they take their seats. The interior of our grotto is lit by canvas candles, throwing their flickering light around the vaulted ceilings and the velvet-clad buttresses. An old chapel, the founders abandoned it as they fled the island for the mainland. We adopted it for our own worship, enhancing its features and architecture to match our aesthetic. As my congregation gathers, I enter behind the last, and the sweet smell of baked cakes reaches me. I grab a soul cake and take a bite of the floury shortbread and pour myself a goblet of the claret to cleanse my mouth during my sermon. Cushioned pews line the grotto, and my audience sit straight-backed on their wooden seats, facing the plinth. The final rays of the sun sink below the horizon, darkening the stained glass at the pointed arch windows and throwing the room into candlelit shadows. I take to the stand to address my flock. Welcome, friends. Here we are, once again, to celebrate our festival of darkness. I say once again, but I know this is an understatement of the deepest kind, for we have gathered here on this island for centuries. We gathered before the other faiths ever came to these shores, and we all continue to gather, despite changes to the wider world. For we gathered here know the truth. Darkness and death are our constant companions. We embrace them, not with fear, but with devotion. A ripple murmur and smiles from the assembled indicate my words have found a home within their minds. And I continue. I'm sure all of you, like myself, have been accused or suspected of being devil worshippers. That we commit acts that are horrible and terrible in a world of laws and ethics. Only we know that we are not satanic in nature. We were here way before the name Satan was ever spoken. We do not seek death or destruction. We are not agents of chaos, or seek to claim anything that is not ours to take. Our God is nature, and only we acknowledge the importance that darkness plays within the lives of every living being. Why should we suppress nature? In life, why should we not express pleasure in the gifts bestowed upon us. And why should we fear that ultimate release of that shedding of our mortal coil? The hoot of the owl, the flutter of the bat, the howl of the wolf, the music of our existence, provided by nature. Of course, in this modern age of scientific discovery, we learn more about our dedications. The natural state of the universe is the absence of light. Darkness is the foundation upon which all is built. Even here, on our tiny planet, as this world orbits the sun, our lives are dictated by the cycle of day and night. Half of our lifetime is spent sleeping, the dark providing the essential recess for our continued existence. So if we are proponents of lives well lived, why are we obsessed by death? Let me put this to you. Imagine a world where death no longer occurs. That would spell our extinction as a species as the population burgeons, and we run out of the resources nature provides. Death drives rebirth. It recycles our constituent parts back into the environment to become something other. Our very flesh and blood are returned to the earth. Humanity has only reached this point due to the evolution of our species, the constant cycle of death and rebirth to achieve perfection. But what of our life force, our energy? What of the very thing that makes us alive? You may call it spirit. As we know, energy can never be destroyed. It can only be converted. So our energy passes from us upon death. And we honor that transcendental passage as we move on. So, honored brethren, feel no guilt in the pleasure gleaned from our celebration of darkness. It is a celebration of the fundamental principles of nature. I pause and take a drink from the goblet on my lacton. The wine tastes divine, its cool bitterness filling my sense of taste and sparking pleasure in my brain. We here gathered are celebrating Samhain. A cheer rises from the assembly, and the goblets are raised and clinked together. We are keepers of the ancient traditions. Of course, we adapt to a changing world, but the principles of Samhain remain. Before us lies the death of the year. All life is extinguished as we move into winter. The fields are harvested and the flocks are slaughtered. Our stockpiles will sustain us through the dark, cold months until we reach the winter solstice, when we once again hold the midwinter festival to demand the forthcoming rebirth. But tonight, friends, we honor the passing of another year. It amuses me when I look around at the regular folk. On this night, they wear costumes to resemble witches or cats or mythical monsters. They go door to door, collecting candy or bobbing for apples. They light jack-o'-lanterns upon their thresholds to ward off the evil spirits abroad this night. They call it Halloween, All Hallows Eve. Even though we remain in the shadows, our culture and traditions have fed through into popular myth. These people mimic our roots, but they do not understand why. I would not have it any other way. We should exist in the darkness as our influence feeds through society. I am amused by it. But enough talking. Let us proceed outside and begin tonight's festivities. As I end my speech, my congregation stands and proceeds back towards the exit. As they do so, they pass my assistant, who hands them each a flaming torch, igniting each one from a burning hearth. In the grounds before our house of worship, a stack of wood is piled high. Atop this sits a figure woven together with straw. The gathering surrounds the bonfire, and I am the last to emerge, also carrying a torch. We form a large circle, and then, without speaking, we approach the pile as one. Thrusting our torches into the wood, we step back and watch as the bonfire takes hold. As the flames grow, the moon is obscured by the rising smoke, but we can still witness its reflection on the waves beyond the cliffs. I feel the heat springing forth against the cold breeze flowing onto the island, and the faces around me take on a red glow. Around the perimeter of the fire, just beyond where we stand, jack-o'-lanterns carved from a variety of pumpkins and gourds set on a low stone wall. Inside are candles, and we light them using long matchsticks. Their subtle, flickering glow adding to the blazing bonfire. As the night deepens, the flames grow larger, their wisps rising and flicking the air as a serpent's forked tongue. I watch as the straw man is engulfed, our offering to nature, a representation of the sacrifices my ancestors used to perform. During this time, we continue our celebration. We eat our cakes and drink our wine. We dance around the fire, carousing with each other, linking arms and holding hands as we make our merriment. We honor the dead. We honor those who have passed into the shadow domain, making room for the rebirth of nature. In our ecstasy, the flames throw off orbs of light, caught on the eddies and the thermals. The wind whips up the flames as we perceive these to be souls finding their way, navigating through the liminal bridge into the realm of shadow and memory. The lanterns ward against the evil that may threaten to return and consume the living from their jealous enmity. We perform our dance macabre. Around us the spirits fly, circling with wild abandon. A whirlwind of life meets death, of light and darkness, of the passing of one reality to the beginning of another. I feel the weight of time bearing down upon me. Ancient rites upheld, the glorious dead honored. We enter an altered state where our corporeal form mingles with the spiritual. We commune with those who have passed through our dancing and revelry, their final parting to the netherworld. We feel the glory of the cosmos laid bare, its secrets open to us, bearing witness to sights few of the living have ever seen. It is a privilege to be here, along with my brethren. And as midnight arrives, our festivities reach a climax. We join our hands and our minds within the maelstrom of souls, bidding them to depart, to embrace the darkness. The bonfire lights up in a final bright blaze before a thunderous sound of thunder echoes across the headland. Midnight strikes and the rain begins. Dampening the bonfire, it reduces to a reddening glow, and we retreat back into the chapel. Our celebrations continue into the next day, following our traditions. But soon, our physical form will leave this place, but our hearts will carry the memory until one day we too will become the honored dead. Until then, we dance, we rejoice, we walk amongst you always. We may live in the darkness, but we are always watching you. The next time you carve a pumpkin, I'll hand out sweets to the trick-or-treaters. I'll read a scary story. I'll watch a horror movie. Remember us, for tonight is our night. Tonight we celebrate Samhain. My heart pounds, as though it is about to explode in my chest. What have I just experienced? I swallow a slug of whiskey to calm my nerves. Shaking, I slump in my armchair as I process tonight's events. Can I make sense of it? What madness has overtaken me? As my pulse calms, I close my eyes, inhaling deeply. Today began as any other. I live alone in a cottage that sits near the summit of a valley between the moors. Autumn Valley is well named. Once summer is over and the farmers end their harvest, the trees that line the slopes provide a spectrum of colour before they shed their leaves as the cold winter arrives. I have lived in my cottage for many years. My home is old, and although updated with extensions and modern features, it retains its old-world character with wooden ceiling beams made of oak and leaded sash windows. I don't mind the solitude. Just a single path winds its way down through Autumn Valley to the village where I stock up on supplies and any other business I have with the outside world. I make sure I leave my home every Friday night to visit the public house on the outskirts. The Ram's Head is as old as this cottage. This represents my total human concept during my week, but it is enough for me. The locals have news and stories and gossip to keep me entertained. This afternoon, I leave the stone walls of my home, closing the hardwood door behind me. I notice the tiles on my roof sagging a little. I'll need to get that looked at. But it is hardly surprising when I consider that my home was built in the 17th century. For it still to be standing at all, even the often wild environments of the surrounding moorland, is a miracle. This particular Friday arrives overcast and breezy. I wear my long overcoat and boots to make my way down the path, through the wood, towards the village for my evening's libations. I also carry a stick to aid my walking, although I needed more for my return journey, back up through the valley, as night meant I had to pick my way almost blindly through the exposed roots and rocks that littered the path. At this time of day, though, as late afternoon passes into twilight, the descent through the trees feels pleasant. The inclement weather enhances the natural beauty on offer, and as my booted feet walk upon a bed of browning leaves, above me seems to glimmer with golden boughs creaking in the wind. The path I follow meanders and is well worn, despite my house being the only property in this valley. I surmise that countless feet had followed my own in the centuries prior to my habitation. As I walk, I anticipate my night at the Ram's Head. The old pub had served the community dating back prior to the Civil War, and I had spent many a happy night whiling away the hours amongst the villagers. I slipped little on the downslope of the path, the composting leaves from the wood slick, but my stick aided my traversal. I emerge from the valley, and I step on the tarmac road leading to the village. A short walk later, I cross the stone bridge, glancing down at the river rushing through, fed from the countless brooks and streams that thread through the moors. Just over the bridge sits the Ram's Head, and I enter through the creaking double doors. Laughter and chatting voices a welcome sound. The landlord, standing behind the bar, nods a greeting to me as I take up my usual spot on a stool at the far end. The tap room has low ceilings, covered in the traditional horse brasses and paintings of the local moorland landscape. The bar itself bristles with pumps, and the landlord, knowing my order, pulls me a pint of the local craft bitter. I thank him and raise the creamy froth to my lips. As the evening progresses, the pub fills up. The villagers and those just passing through gather to celebrate the arrival of the weekend. As autumn sets in, the night arrives quickly, but the gentle lighting in the pub, along with the sounds of merriment inside, keeps the darkness at bay. I am on my third pint when I spot a familiar face. Sitting on his own, in the corner, is an old man that we regulars simply know as Wilf. It's difficult to assess his age. His wrinkled face sits rigid at all times. He never speaks to anyone, but comes here every Friday like myself. Nursing a pint of mild, standing on the table in front of him. I often wonder what his story is. A few drinks in, I decide to find out. I order a pint of mild, and the landlord obliges with raised eyebrows, surprised at my decision to speak to Wilf. And as I approach his small table, the old man fixes me with a stare of consternation and confusion. "I got you a pint," I say, handing him the drink. I take a seat opposite. Wilf stares at it suspiciously, as though I intend to poison him, but then takes a sip. He nods, seeming to accept my gesture, and I settle down to get to know him better. "You live in that cottage at the top of Autumn Valley," he says to me, as though it was an accusation. "I do," I say, taking a sip of my own drink. "Do you know it?" Wilf snorts. "Aye, I know that place. Don't know why you choose to live there, though." "Why not?" I ask. "It suits my needs. It's a beautiful old cottage." "I dare say," says Wilf, and he looks into his pint, moodily. I begin to understand why people leave him be. "What's wrong with my cottage?" I ask. "You know nothing of the history of this village, then," said Wilf. "Not much? But why should I be concerned about that?" "Because you live in the house of the Autumn Valley Witch," he says. I almost spit out my beer. Stifling a laugh, I look at him with my eyebrows raised. "The Autumn Valley Witch? Don't mock me," grumbles Wilf. "If you know what I know, you'll get out of there." "And what do you know about this witch?" I ask. "Seems you need a lesson in history," says Wilf before proceeding. 400 years ago, this village was established as a farming community by the Puritans. They built a church, and the village grew around it. This pub was a barb because they wouldn't allow drinking or any kind of debauchery. Up on the moor, a widow lived alone as they moved in, and watched the community as they chopped down the trees for building and firewood. She lived off the land, and the woods in the valley were hers. She gathered mushrooms and herbs and tracked rabbits and birds for food. When she complained to the village about them destroying her woods because she didn't accept their church, they accused her of witchcraft. They took her, and on the stone bridge, strapped her into the ducking stool and then lowered her into the river. When she escaped and swam to the bank, they grabbed her, as they believed that the devil had intervened in her punishment, and they found her guilty of being a witch. They took her into the woods and hung her from the large oak in the centre. It was autumn, and the trees were shedding the leaves, but as they strung her up, she swore her revenge, and at the moment of her death, a wind whipped up, and the oak shed all its leaves at a single whirlwind. That's why it's called Autumn Valley. I listened to Will with interest, but also increasing skepticism. His tone of voice, deep and spooky, no doubt intended to be more melodramatic. As with most local myths, the story will be embellished over time, adding elements to make it more mysterious and frightening. "I don't believe a word of it," I say, almost laughing. "I've lived up there for years. I'm sure I would have seen any witches flying around on broomsticks or brewing potions at the giant cauldron." "Don't mock me," insists Wilf once again. "Only when the time is right will she come. Tonight is Friday, the most wicked day of the week. The moon is full tonight, just as autumn has arrived, and the trees are now shedding their leaves." I humour Wilf for a while, now understanding why the village tended to leave him alone. He seems to believe what he says, and is rather abrupt and grumpy to boot. I finish my pint, and bid him good night despite his assertions. As I leave, he fixes me with a glare, before holding up a single finger as a warning. I collect my coat and walking stick, and depart the Ram's Head. As the cold night strikes my face, I realise that Wilf was right about one thing. A full moon shines overhead. Its light seems to gild the village silver, its stone walls and buildings framed with a white halo. I've had a few, that's for sure, and my vision warps a little as I make my way back over the stone bridge to the path leading back up through the valley. As I walk, I imagine the puritanical crowd baying for justice as they duck an old woman into the river that I can hear rushing below me. I shudder as the wind finds gaps between my clothing. Further along, I enter the pathway into the wood. The moonlight shines through the trees, rays catching mopes of moisture in the air. The branches around are losing their load, but the ground is littered, making it hard for me to follow the path. A little drunk, and with just the light of the moon to guide me, I stumble through, knowing that as long as I keep ascending, I'll emerge from the valley to the summit of the moor where my cottage lies. I'm glad of my walking stick keeping me steady. As I walk, Wilf's story returns to me. The thought of a lone woman, foraging in the woods, disturbed by the encroaching villagers, and then executed by their beliefs. If it was true, then I feel nothing but sympathy. I am so caught up in his words, I stop suddenly and look around. The wood looks unfamiliar to me. I've walked this path many times, but here I don't recognize. I must have taken a misstep on the way up. Not to worry, I'll carry on going uphill. The valley only leads to my house. The wind seems stronger here, as it whistles through trees and hisses through the remaining canopy. The forest seems older, the trunks more mild and bent with age. Exposed roots spring from the earth as they twist on the slopes to find anchor. I stumble, tripping over the vines. Grabbing my stick, I push myself up and dust myself down. For a moment, the wind seems to speak as it flows through the branches.
I see you.
It is indistinct to my ears, but I swear I can hear a voice on the breeze. Composing myself, I resume my walk. The land flattens and the trees thin a little. I must be nearing the top of the valley, but as I enter a glade, I stop in my tracks. A huge oak, one that I have never seen during my travels through these woods, stands alone in the center of the clearing. Its trunk thick and knotted, and its branches reach out in contorted angles above my head. The tips are fingers grasping in the turbulent air. I stand, open-mouthed, staring at this ancient oak in the heart of Autumn Valley as I am whipped by the wind. But then, just next to the trunk, under a low-hanging branch, what is that? I cannot make it out, a deeper shadow amongst the darkness. Moonlight does not seem to penetrate. It is still, unmoving, just seeming to stand next to the tree, looking at me.
I see you.
I hear the voice on the wind again, and I start to back away. The wind whips up around me to a gale, lifting the fallen leaves around me into a maelstrom of orange and brown. As I watch, they begin to gather, twisting into a tornado of vegetation, the funnel wide at the bottom and tapering into a spiraling point at the top, touching the branches of the ancient oak. It moves around the ground, as though searching for me, its tip feeling the bare branches above my head. I turn to flee, and as I run back to the edge of the glade, I look over my shoulder and see the shadow still lingering by the trunk. The leaf tornado blocks my path, and for a moment I am blinded as it whips me with its bronze it carries. I use my stick like a sword, waving it in front to ward off the stinging leaves, using my other hand to shield my face. I pick up my pace and change direction, and enter the undergrowth away from the glade. As I flee, I discard my stick. Instead, I begin to claw up the hill, pushing through the bushes, feeling my feet sink into the soft earth. I hear what sounds like laughter on the wind, echoing around my mind, laying claim to my sanity. I push through, and with a gasp of air, I find myself on the upper slopes of the moor. The moon is bright at the top of the valley, what thin wisps of cloud slice across its face, caught in the high winds. In the distance, I see my cottage, sat along the slope, and make towards it. To my right, the woods seem alive, with branches swaying and the autumn fall peppering the air like confetti. Shadows linger within. I cannot make them out clearly, but it is not hard to imagine the nightmare that the silhouettes represent. Out of breath, my heart pumping, I reach my cottage. I open the door and stagger inside, gasping to get oxygen into my lungs. I flick on the light switch, banishing the darkness around. As I look down at myself, my clothes are covered in dirt, along with my hands, as I'd grasped at the earth to escape. I stagger into my kitchen and retrieve a bottle of malt I keep in a cupboard, pouring myself a large one into a glass. My heart pounds as though it's about to explode in my chest. What have I just experienced? I swallow the whiskey to calm my nerves. Shaking, I slump in my armchair as I process tonight's events. Can I make sense of it? What madness has overtaken me? As my pulse calms, I close my eyes, inhaling deeply. I run through what just occurred. Had I imagined it? I must have, surely. Reason began to return to my initial confusion. I'd had a few drinks, heard Wilf's overly dramatic folk tale of a witch in the woods, along with his assertions about the timing, and then got lost on the way back. I knew better than most that the wind can make strange and unusual sounds when blowing through a forest, and I had just been caught in a small whirlwind that picked up the leaves. But what about the shadows? Did I actually see anything in them? Closing my eyes, I recalled the shadow stood in front of the huge oak. All I saw was a black outline, vaguely human-shaped. If I returned to that spot in the morning, no doubt I'd find it to be a tree stump on the exposed roots of a nearby fallen trunk. Wilf had got into my head, and I'd panicked. I finished the last of my whiskey, wincing as it goes down. As my pulse steadies, I decide to retire and bring an end to this startling evening. As I make my way upstairs, I feel foolish for allowing myself to be spooked by Wilf. I'd even manage a smile at my own gullibility. Flicking on the lamp in my bedroom, I change into my pyjamas and throw my dirty clothes into a laundry basket, before nipping into my bathroom to wash my face and hands. Returning to my bedroom, I get into bed and pull the covers over. I breathe one final sigh, listening to the wind howling over the moors outside my window, as I reach over and turn off the lamp. In the dark of my room, my eyelids feel heavy as sleep approaches. On the edge of consciousness, I perceive a shadow in the corner, a deeper blackness. I narrow my eyes to discern what it may be.
I see